We are Novels Hall Dynasty. If you want to listen to more novels or more chapters of this novel, visit a path with the name of Novice Hall Dynasty. We continue with the novel.
I became a mighty Leon. Part 1. Chapter 1. Reborn as a Leon. Africa. Kakivero. This was a boundless grassland, a paradise for wild animals. Here, the most types and largest number of wild animals in the world lived. Here, cruel and bloody battles happened every day. At this moment, in a certain area of the boundless grassland, a pride of lions were resting under the shade of a tree. The mighty and tall male lion went out to patrol its territory. The full female lion laid on the ground to rest. As for the 7 or 8 cubs, they were playing around and practicing their fighting and hunting skills. But there was a cub crawling in the bushes lifelessly. A hopeless expression appeared on its cute little face. Chuzhao did not die. However, he turned into a cub. He did not understand. Why did his soul float to Africa and enter the body of a lion? Although he liked watching Animal World, it did not mean that he liked coming to this world. This world was terrifying. He had only been here for 3 days, but had already witnessed a bloody massacre. Furthermore, he had almost lost his life. 5 strong female lions worked together to kill an injured water buffalo. The water buffaloes, on the other hand, charged over ferociously, scattering the lioness and cubs. They attacked the fleeing cubs crazily. He was only 6 months old. If not for the fact that he had cleverly hidden in a tree hole, he would have been trampled flat by the huge hooves. However, in the end, the herd of cows left and the injured water buffalo became a feast for the lions. Of course, he didn't eat it. Instead, he was shivering in the tree hole. He only dared to crawl out after a long time. Meanwhile, his mother, whose mouth was full of blood after eating our prey, came over affectionately and licked him gently with her smelly tongue. Then, she lay down again to feed him breast milk. From the first day Chuzhao turned into a lion, he swore in despair that he would go on a hunger strike and die. He didn't want to eat lion's breast milk and those bloody raw meat. But on the 3rd day, when the lions laid in front of him lovingly and took the initiative to feed him the breast milk, he, who was famished, immediately started to suck in big mouthfuls of milk excitedly. "Nice!" he secretly exclaimed. He ate more vigorously than anyone else. He survived. He no longer wanted to starve or die. Although he had become a lion, at least he was still alive, right? At least he had a younger brother, a mother, a mighty and cool father, and a few cousins, right? It was good to be alive. However, after having his fill, he became melancholic again. So, while the other cubs were playing, he was hiding in the bushes in a daze, thinking about the stupid life as a Leon. There was a strange heat in his abdomen. At times, it was quiet, and at other times, it was flowing. He had been farting and pooping for the past few days. His farts were extremely smelly, and his younger brother, who was always by his side, always became dizzy from the smell and fled after he farted. As for the poop, it was as black as ink. Even a fly would be afraid of it. What illness was this? He remembered that when his soul drifted across the sea and came to Africa, he was hit by a pearl that was shining with dazzling light. And that pearl seemed to be embedded in his soul. Could it be? The strange heat in his stomach was produced by the pearl. Roar. Just as he was feeling bored and letting his imagination run wild, a childish voice suddenly came from the side. A cub with its tail curled up pounced on him. This was his younger brother, Little Curly Tail. His tail was different from that of others. The tip of his tail was always curled, so he gave him this name. Little Curly Tail was very lively and bold. Every day, he would jump around, provoking this and that. Occasionally, he would even jump onto their imposing father's back and bite the majestic mane of the Lion King. His friends and the lioness might spoil him. But that imposing father would always bare his teeth and roar at him. He would even raise his huge claws to beat him up. However, this cub never changed. Of course, he loved playing with Chuzhao, his brother. In the past, his brother might have liked to play with him. But now, his brother was always in a daze and did not care about him. He did not know that his brother had changed. Roar. Seeing that his brother was ignoring his, little curly tail was still in high spirits and jumped on his brother's back. Chu Xiao was starting to get impatient. He turned around and slapped him. However, he missed. Little curly tail dodged very quickly. Seeing that his brother had finally counterattacked, he was extremely excited and continued to pounce probingly. Go away. Chu Xiao wanted to say this, but in the end, he only let out a roar. His childish voice was not imposing at all. Little curly tail bared his fangs and brandished his claws as he continued to attack. His other friends also ran over excitedly and started provoking Chu Xiao, who was unwilling to get up. They seemed to be saying, "Hey, kid, you're a future mighty Leo. If you don't practice your combat skills now, are you going to be a bachelor in the future? When male lions grow up, they have to defeat other male lions and fight for territory to obtain the right to mate and food." Of course, Chu Xiao knew. However, he was not in the mood for it right now. Little curly tail happily hit him as if he wanted to arouse his lion's fighting spirit. The other cubs were also practicing all sorts of fighting techniques in front of them. It was as if they were trying to be teachers. Chu Xiao got a headache from the noise. He stood up abruptly, opened his mouth wide, and roared at the group of little bastards. In the end, no one bothered with him. They didn't even hear it. Little curly tail had a mocking expression on his face. He swung his tail and lowered his body, preparing to continue attacking. Chu Xiao sighed and could only turn around. He cruelly aimed his butt at his younger brother and stuck out his tail. With a puff, he let out a smelly fart. This smelly fart actually carried an extremely terrifying black smoke. The black smoke instantly filled the surroundings. Little curly tail's expression changed. He was finally scared out of his wits. He turned around and ran while rolling and crawling. As for the other companions who were proudly showing off their combat skills, they did not have the time to run away. They were dizzy from the smell, and as if they were drunk, they staggered a few times and fell to the ground one after another, looking terrified and confused. A female lion, who was lying nearby, saw that something was wrong and hurriedly got up and walked over. In the end, as soon as she got close, she stopped in her tracks and vomited everything she had just eaten. It was so smelly. This mother lion was probably cursing in her heart. The culprit, Chu Xiao, had already walked far away and continued to lie in the bushes in a daze. The sky was blue and the clouds were white. On the grassland, the roar of a lion declaring its sovereignty could be heard. What a boring day. Chapter 2. The Lion's Battle Evening. The light of dusk fell upon the boundless grassland. It was beautiful and also bloody. A female lion was injured and her left eye was dripping with blood. She was stabbed in the eye by an animal's horn. She crawled on the ground sadly, her body trembling from the pain. No one went to comfort her, other than our daughter, a 5 to 6 month-old lion's cub. Because the fur color of this lion's cub was more golden and beautiful than that of other cubs, Chu Xiao gave her a name, Mimi. Mimi went to her mother's side and touched her forehead. Then, she laid quietly beside her and accompanied her. She seemed to be able to understand her mother's sorrow. The lions looked at her daughter lovingly with her remaining eye and then at the grassland in the distance. She would have a harder time hunting in the future after she was blinded in one eye. However, her daughter was still young. Right now, she could only try her best to please the other lioness and try to make them like her daughter. This was so that they would share some precious food in the future. The mother and daughter quietly leaned against each other, bathing in the light of setting sun. Little curly tail crawled over stealthily from the bushes, then suddenly jumped up and pounced on Mimi. Mimi was frightened and jumped onto her mother's back. The female lion took a glance and ignored them. The cubs were playing and training their hunting skills while doing so. However, her daughter seemed to be a little introverted and timid. She never dared to face the enemy head-on and liked to run away. She felt helpless too. Little curly hair also jumped onto her back and continued to hit Mimi. Seeing that her mother did not care about her, Mimi could only jump off her back and continue to flee towards another direction. Little curly tail was very excited and quickly followed behind her. Mimi was flustered. She knew that the female lions would not save her, and her half-brothers and sisters were also afraid of little curly tail. Except for this rascal's older brother. Thus, Mai cleverly ran towards Chu Zhaoyi and hid behind his boat. Chu Zhaoyi was lying in the bushes and resting. He really wanted to far than chase this little female cub away. But he thought about it and felt that she was pitiful. She did not even know that her mother was blinded in one eye yet. Hence, he stood up lazily, arched his body, stretched his back, and turned around skillfully. He aimed his bow at his brother, who was sprinting over excitedly with his tail swinging. Rev's little curly tail's expression changed. He suddenly stopped in his tracks, turned around, and ran away. His older brother was angry. He was going to let out a very smelly fart to chase him away. He was so scared. "Mom! Brother is bullying me." Little Curly Tail ran away to his mother's side and complained about his brother's bullying. He and Chu Zhaoyi's mother was a beautiful, young, loving and gentle lioness named Aisha. Of course, this was the name Chu Zhaoyi gave her. Chu Zhaoyi's initial rejection turned into acceptance. He could clearly feel Aisha's love for him and his brother. The cub's body was flowing with Aisha's blood and aura. It was full of dependence and respect for Aisha. Even if he occupied it, he still could not change these feelings. That was his mother. Aisha ignored Little Curly Tail's complaint. She was resting to replenish her energy. The night in Kakibro was not peaceful. Especially for a small life without the ability to protect itself. Even the king of this land. Hyenas, wild dogs, wolves, leopards, and other carnivores would seize every opportunity to kill their competitors' children. With one less young competitor, their descendants would have one less enemy to fight for food within the future. Therefore, the lioness would be more careful at night. Chu Zhaoyi chased Little Curly Tail away. Chu Zhaoyi lay down again and thought with melancholy about how he would live life as a lion in the future. In order to survive, he had to become stronger. Mai, who was hiding behind him, saw him lying down and pretending to be dead again. Hence, she reached out with her soft paws and scratched his butt, wanting to wake him up to play. At least, Chu Zhaoyi would not bully her. In fact, he would even protect her. She was willing to play with this melancholic male cub. But Chu Zhaoyi ignored her. He continued to play dead. He even closed his eyes. Suddenly, a low and terrifying roar came from afar. This was the voice of a leon. But this was not the cry of the Lion King of this territory. The female lions lying on the ground all stood up and looked in the direction of the cry with nervous expressions. Did a wandering lion invade their territory? If their king could not make it back in time, or if he couldn't defeat this invading lion after returning, then their children would be in danger. The new male lion would kill all the little cubs and mate with the lioness again to produce his own offspring. Therefore, at this very moment, these 5 female lions were panicking and uneasy, their gazes fixed on the distant grassland. The little cubs also felt the tension in the atmosphere. They quietened down and stopped making a ruckus. Chu Zhaoyi got up from the ground and cursed his bad luck. In this situation, he could only pray that his father, the majestic Lion King, would appear and defeat the other party. For the first time, he felt how weak he was and how fragile his life was. If a new Lion King were to be crowned, he, Little Curly Tail, Mai, and the cubs would all be killed. That could not happen. He had to strengthen his ability to protect himself. If he relied solely on the protection of his father and mother, he might not even live to adulthood. Looking at the quiet Little Curly Tail and the trembling Mai beside him, Chu Zhaoyi raised his little paw and made a decision. I can't just wait for death. God gave him a chance to live again. Even though he was a lion, he should work hard to survive. He had to fight. He had to fight for his life and strive for success. He had to become stronger. He had to defeat the enemy and protect his family. Roar! Another lion's roar suddenly sounded. This was his father's roar. His father, the majestic and cool strong male lion, finally returned from the borders of the territory and stopped the invading leon. The roars were endless. The 2 lions seemed to have started fighting. The lioness looked on nervously. The little cubs shivered as they hid beside their mothers, waiting anxiously for their father's triumphant return or his death. Chu Zhaoyi raised his claws and patted Mai, who was trembling all over. He looked calm and looked as if he was saying, "Sister, don't be afraid. I'm here." Their father was in his prime and should not be defeated. Unless the other party was his brother. If he was really defeated, it would be their fate. It was useless to be afraid. The sun finally set. Chapter 3. Learning skills. Night fell. There was still an air of uneasiness in the bushes. Under the anxious and eager gazes of the lioness and the cubs, their king, the majestic lion, finally returned triumphant with his head held high. That lush golden mane fluttered in the night wind, adding to his mighty aura. The 5 female lions went up to him one by one and rubbed his head and body in a floating manner. They could finally relax. Their king had won. And their children were finally safe. The little cubs finally relaxed and continued to play. However, they did not dare to approach their father. The male lion was too tall and majestic, unlike the lioness, who were loving and gentle, so the young cubs were all afraid of him. However, little Curly Tail was not afraid at all. He ran over and grabbed the lion's tail daringly. The lion was probably in a good mood because he had won the battle. For the first time, he tolerated little Curly Tail's nonsense. He lay there and narrowed his eyes. Little Curly Tail continued playing tirelessly and even jumped onto the lion's body to bite his mane. This was something the lion could not tolerate. His mane was the symbol of his might and dominance. It was not to be blasphemed. Roar! The lion suddenly opened its mouth and roared at little Curly Tail, who was on his back, with anger. Little Curly Tail was scared out of his wits. He jumped off the lion's back and ran away. The lion glanced at him disdainfully before lying back down and closing his eyes. Chuzhou was not sleepy. He thought for a long time and decided to practice climbing trees first. With his current age and physique, it was impossible for him to quickly become stronger. The most important thing was to preserve his life. Compared to the ground full of carnivores and large animals, the trees were much safer. As long as he did not encounter animals like leopards or baboons on the trees. Normally, these animals did not dare to enter lion territory anyway. Actually, the biggest threat to the little cubs' lives did not come from other animals, but wandering lions. But a lion's body was too heavy, and they were generally unwilling to climb trees. Even if they climbed a tree, they would only climb to a very low height. Moreover, they could only rest on a thick branch. As therefore, if there came a day that his father was defeated and the wandering lion came to kill him, he could climb up a tree to hide. He could not run away from the lion, and begging was useless. He could only climb trees to save his life. Hence, this skill was very suitable for him now. There was a small tree beside him. He decided to use the small tree to practice. At the very least, he had to successfully climb up to the first branch first. When he was practicing tree climbing, little Curly Tail, who was scared away by his father, ran over curiously. However, he did not dare to get too close and looked at him in confusion. He seemed to be saying, "What's so fun about trees? Brother would rather play with trees than with me." Chuzhou climbed for a while but did not manage to climb up. He felt extremely tired. But he was not discouraged and continued to practice while panting. Whoosh! My, who was watching from the side, got excited. She rushed over and jumped up. Her foreclaws moved quickly and she actually climbed up to the first branch instantly. Then, the female cub lowered its head and looked at Chuzhou proudly. Chuzhou was very depressed. Little Curly Tail did not want to be eaten. He quickly ran over, dashed forward, and jumped. In the end, his head hit the tree trunk heavily with a bang and he fell straight to the ground. He was in so much pain that he saw stars and cried out. Idiot! Chuzhou sighed. It seemed that other than hunting and giving birth to cubs, female lions were born with many more skills than male lions. Little Curly Tail wailed for a while before getting up from the ground. He looked up at Mai, who was on the tree, and his fighting spirit was aroused. He climbed up the tree again. In the end, he fell down again after climbing up a few steps. Chuzhou was secretly happy. This kid was willing to learn how to climb trees. That was exactly what he wanted. He followed his brother's example and continued to climb up. Little Curly Tail saw that he was not discouraged and did not mock him. He also stood up again and continued to climb. Mai stood on the branch and watched the brothers fail again and again. She could not understand. It was so easy. She decided to go down and demonstrate to the two brothers again. In the end, she could not get down. Roar. She started to feel afraid. After testing for a few times, her forelimbs trembled and she could not hold on to the tree properly. When she lowered her head, the tree felt so steep and high. "Mommy!" On the branch, she wailed in fear. Little Curly Tail was floating under the tree and jumping around. Chuzowie finally climbed up in one go. "Girl, don't be afraid. I'm here." As a man, Chuzowie naturally had to comfort this helpless and terrified girl. He stood on the branch, raised his paw, and patted Mimi's head. He let out a roar with a calm expression. "Girl, watch carefully. Learn from me and go down." Chuzowie lowered his head and climbed onto the tree trunk, preparing to go down. In the end, "Mommy!" He started to wail and tremble. No wonder lions were unwilling to climb trees. It turned out that they had a natural fear of heights. The tree was clearly not that tall, so why was he trembling all over? He was so scared that he could not steady his body and claws anymore. The two little cubs, one male and one female, were crawling on the branches of the small tree, shivering and crying out for their mothers. Chuzowie felt embarrassed. Little Curly Tail squatted under the tree, raised his head, and grinned, seemingly laughing again. Chuzowie suddenly had an idea. Since he would free afraid when he looked down, he would climb down in reverse. He did not hesitate and immediately took action. Indeed, when his head looked up and he went down in reverse, his body finally stopped trembling and his claws could grab very firmly onto the tree trunk. However, just as he was about to land on the ground, he suddenly lost his balance and fell down. He suddenly felt a sharp pain on his right claw. He raised his claw and saw a very sharp long splinter pierced in it. So painful. He trembled, but he did not think much of it. He bit down on it with his teeth, endured the pain, and pulled it out. The intense pain made him shiver all over. Fresh blood flowed out of the wound. He did not have time to think. He immediately licked it with his tongue and started doing the most primitive disinfecting method. Little Curly Tail circled around him and roared twice. It was obvious that he smelled blood and was very worried. Mimi mimicked him and carefully retreated down from the tree to land safely. The two little cubs surrounded him and rubbed his head, seemingly comforting him. It was a little strange. Chuzowie was stunned. The initially painful wound immediately stopped hurting after he licked it with his saliva. At the same time, the strange heat in his abdomen suddenly surged up and flowed along the blood vessels in his body to the wound on his right claw. The blood immediately stopped flowing. The pain also completely disappeared. He looked at his right claw and was secretly shocked. Chapter 4. The hyena is here. It was a quiet night. At least for the lions. Chuzowie woke up at dawn when the sky in the east started to turn white. From afar, the low growl of a lion could be heard. The Lion King, who always slept in during the day, went out to patrol his territory again when everyone was asleep at night. He peed and rubbed his mane, leaving behind an aura that threatened his enemies. Obviously. Although he defeated the wandering lion in the evening, it gave him a lot of pressure. In order to protect his territory and bloodline, he had to be more diligent and continue to strengthen the defense. Chuzowie stretched and got up from the ground, shaking off the grass on his fur. Then, he raised his right claw and looked at it. To his surprise, he realized that the wound from last night had already healed and there was not even a scar left. It seemed that not only could his saliva stop bleeding, it could also quickly heal his wounds. This was a huge discovery. Most animals died from the infections of their wounds. Now that he had this skill, his survival ability was greatly enhanced. However, he did not slack off. He began to continue practicing climbing trees. His right claw, which was injured last night, no longer hurt and seemed to have become stronger. Whoosh, this time, he only used one move to rush up the first branch. Then, he continued upwards. When Esha heard the noise, she raised her head and glanced at him. She quickly got up and jogged over. She stood under the tree and raised her head, roaring anxiously. It seemed to be saying, "Kid, don't be naughty. It's dangerous. Come down quickly." Mommy will catch you. This tree was too small for her to climb up. If she accidentally bent the tree, Chu Xiao would be in even more danger. Hence, she could only growl from below, urging Chu Xiao to come down. Chu Xiao climbed onto the second branch, still full of energy. He originally wanted to continue climbing up, but could only retreat when he saw his mother crying out miserably and anxiously. This time, he retreated very steadily. When he was about to land, he jumped lightly and landed on the ground. After being stopped last night, he cleared away everything around the tree. Since he wanted to practice climbing trees, he naturally had to eliminate all dangers beforehand. Aisha was a little surprised to see him climb down so easily. She stared at his small body and paused for a moment. Then, she stuck out her tongue and licked him lovingly, reminding him not to take any more risks and to sleep. Chu Xiao could only lie down and close his eyes, pretending to sleep. After the lions left, he continued to climb the tree. A red glimmer of light soon appeared on the horizon. Gradually, the morning sun peeked out like a sneaky peeping Tom. Chu Xiao stood on the highest branch of the small tree and looked up at the beautiful sunrise. His heart was filled with pride. One day, he would become an awe-inspiring lion king that would make his enemies tremble in fear. Dawn finally arrived. Out of the 5 diligent female lions, 1 stayed behind to look after the children while the other 4 set off to hunt in the morning. Mai's mother, the blind lion's Kissier, was left behind. She crawled in the bushes and watched as her sisters left with high spirits. There seemed to be sadness in her remaining eye. Mai was curled up in her arms, sleeping soundly. The gentle morning sun shone on the mother and daughter, giving them a golden glow. Chu Xiao stood on the tree and looked at this beautiful and warm scene, feeling a little regretful. His saliva could heal wounds. However, there was no way he could heal a blinded eye. This loving mother lion had clearly been given the cold shoulder by her king, the majestic Leo. When the female lions set off to hunt, they rubbed their heads against the male lions. And when Kissier went over to curry favor with the lion, she was mercilessly avoided by the Leo. Animals were like humans. In fact, they were even more heartless than humans. A blinded lioness would not only lose her image, but it would also affect her future hunting. There were very few female lions in this pride. There were only 5 of them. Now that Kissier had lost an eye, her combat strength was greatly reduced. In the future, the amount of food would also decrease. Hence, the lion turned cold towards her. Kissier was very sad. She crawled in the bushes dejectedly and looked at her daughter, but she did not give up. For her daughter, she could not give up. The lion crawled on a nearby slope and closed its eyes to rest. He waited for the lioness to return while protecting the cubs. The lion looked very relaxed and lazy. He did not need to hunt and could enjoy the fruits of others' labor. However, he was extremely important to the pride. With him around, other wandering lions and carnivores did not dare to come and threaten the young cubs. His huge body and fluffy and flamboyant mane could cause great fear to his enemies even if they were far away. Of course, nothing was absolute. Just as he was enjoying the morning sun with his eyes narrowed, he heard sounds of awe coming from the bushes not far away. Those were the cries of hyenas and extremely annoying. As the second brother of Africa, hyenas had an extremely strong bite that was even more terrifying than a lion's bite. Although their movements were ugly and they looked comical when they ran, they were extremely fast and did great endurance. Their noses were very sensitive. Even though they were very far away, they could still keenly pick up the smell of blood and moving groups. They mostly ate rotten meat and loved to snatch the spoils of other carnivores. They were despicable and cunning. Occasionally, they would hunt personally as well. Of course, other than being called the second brother of Africa, they were also called the ant-biting brothers. Regardless of whether it was hunting or eating, most of them would go for the ants first. Some living animals would die from hyenas biting their ants. It was extremely tragic. Normally, hyenas would never dare to be imprudent in the territory of lions, especially where there are male lions. In the grasslands, hyenas feared lions the most. At this moment, the sounds of ah rang out from the bushes not far away. Clearly, many hyenas had gathered. Could it be that they were too hungry and knew that the female lions had gone out to hunt? Did they want to attack the lion's base? This was intolerable. The male lion immediately stood up and spread its majestic mane. It swung its tail and jogged over, letting out a furious roar. It seemed to be saying, "Despicable and ugly thieves, how dare you behave atrociously in my territory? I will teach you a lesson." Kissy stood up and looked nervously at the young cub beside her. She raised her neck and looked at the running Leo. She hoped that her king could chase away those annoying hyenas. Chuzali stood on the branch of the small tree, his heart trembling. He knew how terrifying hyenas were. These guys were not only cruel and perverted, but they also hunted in large numbers. They dared to attack a lone Leo. If a hyena were to see a young cub like him, they would definitely chomp on him. Although his father was powerful and intimidating, it would be dangerous if dozens of them came. Just as he was secretly worried, he caught a glimpse of a shadow from the corner of his eye. It flashed across the bushes in another direction. His heart trembled, and he hurriedly turned his head to look in another direction. He almost fell off the tree in shock after looking. In another direction, there was a cackle of hyenas. There were about 7 or 8 of them. They took advantage of the lion's departure and used the bushes as cover to sneak over quickly. If he had not been standing on the tree, he really would not have noticed. Roar! 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 He hurriedly issued an alert to Kissir and the 7 cubs under the tree. This was bad. A lion could not handle so many hyenas. The 7 little cubs under the tree would probably be doomed. Chapter 5. Battle. Roar, the female lion, Kissir, immediately tensed up. She took a few steps forward and stood in front of the young cubs, baring her fangs and roaring at those despicable ambushers. The lion had already run far away to chase away the hyenas in another direction. He definitely would not be able to return in such a short time. Most of these young cubs were 6 to 7 months old. The oldest was only a year old. To these cunning and cruel hyenas, there was no threat at all. They could only be treated as a sumptuous meal. Therefore, she was the only one who could fight now. But with so many ambushers, she could barely take care of herself. How could she protect these 8 young cubs? Kissir's heart was filled with despair and fear. However, she would never give up. Whoosh! She took the initiative to attack and decided to fight to the death to stop these damn hyenas outside. Otherwise, they would get close to the cubs. Roar! 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 Chuzali stood on a branch and saw that the hyenas were getting closer and closer. He hurriedly gestured to Little Curly Tail and the other cubs below to let them climb up the tree quickly. The smart mama was the first to rush up. Just like last night, the little lions ran up the tree and landed on the first branch easily. Little Curly Tail was the second to rush up. He was much more agile than last night. Clearly, fear had stimulated this kid's potential. As for the other 5 young cubs, they surrounded the tree and clumsily and fearfully probed a few times, but were unable to climb up. They looked like they were at a loss and were at the mercy of the hyenas. At this moment, she had already pounced towards the cackle of hyenas. The 7 or 8 hyenas were extremely cunning. They immediately split up and ran towards the young cubs from different directions. Since they had been discovered, they did not hide anymore. They cackled and ran over excitedly at their fastest speed, preparing to enjoy the feast of young cubs. As Kissir ran back in a hurry, roaring in despair. She could not do it alone. However, this also stimulated her courage to go all out. With a roar, she suddenly jumped up and pounced at the closest hyena. Under normal circumstances, female lions would not fight to the death with hyenas. Especially lionesses that had children that needed to be fed. When hyenas were injured, they had companions and could eat rotten meat with them. If a lion was injured, it could only wait for death. A lion and other female lions would never let a disabled lion share their precious food. In fact, they would even cruelly drive her out of the pride to save their limited food and resources. However, Kissir could not care less now. None of the 8 cubs must die. She pounced on the hyena and bit its neck, rolling on the ground with it. The other hyenas immediately tucked their tails between their legs and paused. However, they only paused for a moment before running towards the young cubs again. They were too hungry. At this moment, Chuzali had already jumped down from the tree. He used his head to push against the butt of a cub and used all his strength to push it up the first branch. There were still 4 cubs. Climb. Climb. He let out a childish roar, jumped down the tree again, and lifted the second cub. When he pushed the second cub onto the tree, he was so tired that he was panting and his limbs felt like jelly. However, he quickly retreated once again and picked up the third one. Climb. Climb. He shouted in his heart, exhausted. Finally, the third cub went up too. But there were still 2 more under the tree. At this moment, a hyena was drooling as it ran over excitedly. Kissier pushed a hyena down and pushed another down after that. Although she had bitten their throats, if she did not continue biting, they would still stand back up. The hyena's life force was extremely tenacious. However, Kissier had no time to kill them. She could only pounce on one, then quickly pounce on and bite another. She hoped to scare them or attract their hatred. Indeed, the hyena that she had pounced on previously had blood dripping from its neck. It stood up, bared its teeth, and pounced at her with hatred. Immediately, 3 crazy hyenas surrounded her and started biting her viciously. Kissier's legs, butt, face, and body were soon covered in blood. The 3 hyenas were not any better. Every one of them had a head full of blood. One of the hyenas had its chin bitten through, but it continued to bite fearlessly. As for Chu Zhaoi, there were still 2 frightened and desperate cubs under the tree. At this moment, an ugly hyena was already drooling and had pounced over. At this critical moment, Chu Zhaoi suddenly jumped down from the tree. He swayed in front of the hyena and turned to run. The hyena was stunned for a moment before it immediately turned around and chased after him. Chu Zhaoi was the closest to it, and he was also a young lion cub. He was so slow that it looked comical. The hyena believed that it only needed a few steps to catch up to Chu Zhaoi. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Little Curly immediately jumped down from the tree. He hurriedly pushed against the 4th cub's butt and struggled to push it up. As for the last cub, it had already fallen to the ground in fright. It did not show any signs of wanting to climb the tree. Even when Little Curly Tail went down, he was not able to push the cub up the tree. Currently, the panting Little Curly Tail could no longer care about it. Instead, he looked at his brother nervously and fearfully. His brother was being chased by a super scary hyena. He was so scared that his entire body was trembling. Mama stood on the second branch and whimpered. She looked at her mother, who was covered in wounds, and then at Chu Zhaoi, who was about to be pounced on by a hyena. Her face was filled with fear. Whoosh! Just as the terrifying hyena leapt up ferociously and was about to pounce on Chu Zhaoi suddenly stopped, turned around, crawled under the hyena's crotch, and ran towards the big tree at the side. God bless me. I only have one chance. Chu Zhaoi prayed in his heart. He gripped his teeth and used all his strength. He suddenly jumped up high and jumped onto the tree trunk. His 4 sharp claws grabbed onto the bark as he quickly climbed up. Using the force of his charge, he actually climbed up the tree's branches in one move. At this moment, the hyena that had been played had already turned back and caught up to him. It raised its head, bared its teeth, and looked angrily at Chu Zhaoi on the tree. It let out an angry and embarrassed scream. Pooh! Chu Zhaoi lay limp on the branch, breathing heavily as he spat at the hyena. He looked up and saw another young cub lying on the ground, shivering in fear. The other hyenas had already run over. Chu Zhaoi's heart skipped a beat as he sighed to himself. He had already tried his best. He could not be blamed for not being able to save his last friend. Right at this moment, Shi-Er, who had been fighting 3 hyenas, suddenly ran back covered in blood. With a sudden leap, she landed under the small tree. Then, she turned around and protected the shivering cub under her abdomen. With her butt facing the small tree and her mouth facing the hyenas that were running close, she bared her fangs and let out a terrifying roar. Not only was her badly mutilated face bleeding, but it was also showing a terrifying expression of death. The few hyenas that had run near her were so frightened that they suddenly stopped in their tracks and hit their tails, not daring to take another step forward. Oh oh oh! Oh oh oh! The hyenas cried out anxiously and angrily for their other companions. After a while, the other injured hyenas surrounded them. The 8 hyenas bared their teeth and howled at Kissier fiercely and fearfully, trying to break her fighting spirit. However, even though she was covered in wounds and covered in blood, she still protected the shivering lion cub. She bared her fangs and refused to back down. Her single eye, which was dyed red with blood, was filled with an expression of facing death with equanimity. The young cubs on the tree and her daughter were silent. They lowered their heads and looked at her in a daze. Chu Xiaoi, who was sitting on the tree, was also stunned. This was motherly love and responsibility. Be it humans or animals, they all had such great and tragic feelings. Roar, an angry roar suddenly came from afar. The majestic lion, with its mane flying and fangs bared, finally returned with a murderous aura. The hyenas immediately dispersed. Chapter 6. Motherly love. The lion had returned. The crisis was resolved. The female lion, Kissier, crawled on the ground tiredly, panting heavily. Scarlet blood blurred her vision. The wounds all over her body started to hurt intensely. She shivered all over and raised her head, looking deeply at her daughter on the branch with her blood-stained eye. She seemed to be saying goodbye. She knew that her life had reached its end. Hyenas often ate rotten meat, and terrifying bacteria and viruses gathered in their teeth and saliva. If it was just 1 or 2 wounds, they might slowly heal. But now, her entire body was covered in wounds, some so deep that her bones could be seen. She had just used up all her strength and spirit. Her body was close to breaking down and there was no possibility of recovery. To heal such wounds, one needed food, disinfection, and a good constitution. But she did not have any of these. She could only wait for death slowly. She raised her head and looked at her enraged daughter. Her pitiful eyes were filled with sadness and worry. Mai, who was on a branch, seemed to have sensed her emotions. She trembled as she climbed down the tree and obediently curled up beside her. Just like that, they snuggled up to each other and enjoyed the wonderful time of possibly Kissier's last day on Earth. Usually, when a female lion knew that it was about to die, it would quietly leave the pride of lions and its children. It would then find a secluded place and wait for death alone with dignity. Obviously, Kissier already had such plans. The male lion chased away the hyenas and quickly returned. He glanced coldly at her, who was riddled with wounds, then raised his head to look at the young cubs on the tree. He was surprised. However, he did not express any fatherly or husbandly love. He only paused for a few seconds before turning around and lying back on the mount, waiting for food. When the 4 female lions returned with their prey, they immediately smelled the strong scent of blood. They hurriedly put down their prey and ran over. When they saw that their children were safe and sound, they finally stopped feeling nervous and walked over. They rubbed their heads against Kissier and brought their children to the food. The lion was already sprawled in front of the food and chowing down. The female lions and young cubs could only drool as they stood at the side, waiting for him to finish eating. No one looked at the wounded and dying Kissier. Mai lay next to her mother and cried out a few times. She was young, weak and obviously very sad. Chu Xiaoi lay on a branch of the tree and watched the scene before him. He sighed in his heart, but he knew that this was the law of survival for lions. Pity and gratitude did not exist. The most important thing was to survive. Sometimes, in order to live, they could even need their own children. His mother, Ersha, was lying on the ground, calling out to him. Little Curly Tail was lying beside his mother, enjoying his milk. Chu Xiaoi glanced at Kissier and her daughter before turning around and carefully retreating from the tree. He ran to his mother's side and drank the sweet milk. He had just expended a lot of energy and was extremely tired and hungry. He could already eat meat. If his father still had leftovers, he would not mind taking a few bites. The lion ate very slowly and was very picky. First, he would eat the prey's glutinous internal organs, then he would eat the most tender and plump meat on the prey. On the other hand, the lioness who risked their lives to hunt and still needed to nurture their children could only drool as they waited patiently at the side. Finally, the lion finished eating and left. The 4 female lions immediately rushed forward. Only by snatching the most meat could they feed their children. The 4 female lions wolfed down the food. The 7 little cubs followed their mothers and jogged over. They ate a few pieces of meat to get used to the smell of blood on their food. No one cared about Kissier, who had just saved their children and was lying on the ground covered in blood and wounds, and her daughter. The mother-daughter pair leaned against each other and stared blankly. There was no resentment or anger, only helplessness and sorrow. Chu Xiao pushed Little Curly Tail away with all his might and even pointed his butt at him. He threatened him with his fists and finally managed to grab a large piece of thigh meat. Little Curly Tail felt wronged and could only squeeze to his mother's side to eat some meat. While they were wolfing down the meat, Chu Xiao dragged the piece of thigh meat back to the tree and placed it in front of Kissier. Then, he ran towards the prey again and continued to snatch the meat. Kissier was stunned. She stared at his small and weak figure for a while before she could not resist the smell of food and immediately started eating. When Mai Mai saw that her mother had meat to eat, she obediently laid under her and started to drink milk. Chu Xiao slapped Little Curly Tail and snatched another piece of meat before running back. Little Curly Tail howled in anger, but there was nothing he could do. Chu Xiao gave Kissier 5 pieces of meat, each smaller than the last. Because there was not much meat to begin with, after the lion ate the best parts and the 4 female lions wolfed it down, there was really nothing left. He was also very hungry. Seeing that the prey was only left with its skin and bones, he could only go over and lick the remaining flesh and blood on the bones to familiarize himself with the smell of blood. Then, he eagerly went to his mother's side and drank her milk. Aisha laid on the ground. Although she was not full, she still breastfed him and Little Curly Tail gently. Roar. Little Curly Tail was angry at the sight of him. Seeing that he was enjoying his food, he could not help but extend his little paw and sneak an attack on his head. Chu Xiao did not have the time to care about him. As he ate, he stuck out his butt at him and curled his tail, making a posture of farthing. Little Curly Tail jumped in fright. He turned around and ran away without finishing his milk. Brat, in front of me, you will always be my little brother. Chu Xiao snorted inwardly. After eating, he entered the bushes and walked in front of Kissier. Without any explanation, he went straight to her side and stuck out his tongue to lick her wounds. Kissier was stunned. She turned her head and looked at him blankly. She had planned to leave the pride when the sky turned dark and find a quiet place to wait for her death. The wounds on her body had already attracted flies and were starting to get inflamed. She knew that she did not have long to live. Hence, she was bidding farewell to her daughter silently and did not want anyone to disturb her. But this kid, what was he doing? Sigh, forget it. She was about to die anyway. She looked at her daughter sadly, not knowing how to say goodbye to her. She did not dare to imagine if her daughter could survive after she left. Mai Mai stared blankly as Chu Xiao meticulously licked the wounds on her mother's body. She wanted to stop him but did not dare to. Little Curly Tail came close with a shocked expression. What was wrong with his brother? Was he still hungry and deciding to eat Aunt Kissier? Brother is indeed scary. Upon seeing this scene, Little Curly Tail trembled and his respect for his brother increased. The female lions rested. The lion went around. Under the tree, Chu Xiao licked the wounds on Kissier's body very seriously. Almost every wound was smeared with his saliva. He was not sure if it would work. However, this was the only way. He could not bear to watch this mother he respected die alone miserably. Although he was a lion now, his soul was still a human soul. He respected and loved all mothers in the world, be it humans or animals. Chapter 7. Revival. The weather was a little hot. After eating their fill, the lioness and cubs hid in the shade to rest. After Chu Xiao disinfected Kissier, he continued to practice climbing trees. He did not know which month it was now. But from the looks of it, it was almost the dry season. There were only 2 seasons here, the rainy season and the dry season. During the rainy season, the rain was abundant and the vegetation was lush. It could attract many herbivores. This was the happiest season for carnivores. Even at their doorstep, they would be able to catch delicious prey. There would be fresh meat every day. Once the dry season arrived, food would be scarce. The herbivores would start to migrate to places with water and grass. At this time, there would no longer be any prey in the territories of many lions. To survive, the lions would also migrate with the herbivores. The journey was extremely arduous. One would have a filling meal one day, then had to start for the next meal. They might even have to go hungry for many days. Sometimes, one would not even be able to drink a drop of water. At this time, the death rate of cubs would be extremely high. Therefore, some powerful prides would claim their territory near rivers. Even during the dry season, there would be food to fill one's hunger. Unless the dry season was prolonged and the river dried up. The pride Shujiao was and did not have any rivers near their territory. There were only a few small water sources. Once the dry season arrived, it would be extremely dangerous. It did not rain for the past few days. The air was also a little hot. The herbivores of all sizes around our territory had disappeared. During the hunt this morning, the female lions had also run far away. From all the signs, the rainy season might end soon. At that time, an even greater danger would descend upon the small pride of lions that had 8 young cubs to feed. If there was a migration, the cubs that could not keep up with the team might be abandoned. There would be many dangers along the way. Hence, Shujiao decided to take the time to train his physique. Apart from practicing climbing trees, he also had to practice endurance and train the muscles of his forelimbs. In a lion's battle, other than their sharp teeth, they also needed a strong physique and front limbs. Ordinary lions only needed to grow slowly and use their strength in their prime to win in battle. Therefore, they were all very lazy. They only ate, slept, and ate. They were very passive as they waited for the peak state of their bodies to arrive. Then, they would fight for territory, become a lion king, have many wives and concubines as they formed a pride and wait for death slowly. However, Shujiao could not wait. He wanted to take the initiative to practice and become stronger. If he trained his muscles to be strong enough, he could slap the other party when fighting and the other party would fall to the ground. Then, things would be much simpler. Even when escaping, he would be faster than a normal lion and be able to run further. Although the lion was powerful, it did not have any stamina when running. It could only run a short distance before panting. It was far worse than hyenas. A lion like this might look impressive, but it was easier to be played with. The hyenas and leopards that were afraid of lions, or even the smaller wild dogs, could play with the lions as they pleased if they were smarter. Shujiao could not make that happen. Whoosh! With a sprint, he climbed onto a branch of the big tree and walked to the thinner branch next to it, practicing his balance on the tree. After practicing for a while on the branch, he climbed down the tree and trained his forelimbs in the grass. Then, he straightened his body and placed his 2 front limbs on the tree trunk. He bent his 2 back limbs and practiced the horse stance. Soon, his small body started to tremble and ache. However, he still persisted. Mai lay beside her mother and looked at him quietly and strangely, not knowing what he was doing. The little lioness seemed to know that her mother was seriously injured and knew that she was about to die. Her mood was terrible. She crawled on the ground, closed her eyes, and breathed evenly, seemingly asleep. Ever since she was let by Shujiao, she felt the pain all over her body gradually lessen. Her wounds were numb and itchy, but she felt very comfortable. At the same time, a strong sense of sleepiness swept over her. Unknowingly, she fell asleep. The other lionesses were resting. Little Curly Tail slept soundly beside his mother. Shujiao was the only one who was tirelessly doing all sorts of strange actions in the bushes and trees. The sun gradually set in the west and fell on the horizon of the grassland. A breeze blew, bringing with it a dry heat. In the evening, the female lions woke up one after another. Their breakfast did not fill their stomachs. They still had to feed the cubs, so they had to replenish their food. Otherwise, the cubs would not be able to have milk to drink. No one knew where the lion went. The 4 female lions looked at Kissier, who was sleeping soundly on the ground. If the lionesses wanted to go out to hunt, they had to leave a healthy lion behind to protect the young cubs. However, their companion, Kissier, was seriously injured and on the verge of death. She was about to die. Perhaps, she would not even be able to make it through tonight. She could not be relied on to protect the cubs. Roar. Arisha was a little anxious. If they did not go hunting before the sky turned dark, the cubs would be in even more danger at night. Those annoying hyenas loved to move around at night. The other 3 female lions were also a bit impatient. They all raised their heads and looked into the distance, hoping that the male lion would quickly return. However, there was no sign of the lion in the distance. At this moment, Kissier seemed to hear their anxious calls and opened her eyes. She stood up. Although she looked a little tired and haggard and her fur was messy and full of blood, her eyes were still bright and determined. She stood steadily. She did not look like a pitiful mother who was seriously injured and about to die. The gazes of the 4 female lions stalked on her body as if they were a bit surprised. They all came over and rubbed their bodies and heads with her. They found it unbelievable. However, now was not the time to dawdle. The sun was setting. Night was approaching. The lioness did not dare to delay and immediately set off. She looked at their backs, then lowered her head to look at her daughter, and then at the wounds on her body. Her gaze was blank, as if she was dreaming. Wasn't she going to die? However, she only slept for a short while and now, she did not feel any pain. Moreover, the wounds on her body actually started to heal. Those annoying flies had also disappeared. She walked with ease as if she was not seriously injured at all. Her spirit, which had been dispirited and absent-minded in the morning, was now abnormally full and healthy. What was going on? She was stunned for a moment before she suddenly turned around and looked at the big tree. On the big tree, Chu Hao was using his 2 forelimbs to grab tightly onto the branches. His body was hanging down, and his tongue was stuck out. He was panting as he tried to pull himself up. She stared at him blankly for a long time. Chapter 8. Lion vs. Python. Night fell. A silver moon rose up the branches. The lioness had returned. They seemed a little dejected as they only brought back a small warthog. Arisha was limping and seemed to be injured. The 4 female lions dragged the warthog into the bushes and placed it in front of Kissier, preparing to enjoy it with her. Roar! At this moment, the lion suddenly jogged back from the darkness. Its mane fluttered in the wind majestically. The 4 female lions' stomachs were rumbling with hunger. Just as they were about to quickly take a few bites of their prey, the male lion suddenly roared angrily and dashed over, slamming its claws at them. His actions were fierce and merciless. The female lions retreated in panic. The lion bared its teeth and growled as if it was threatening and reprimanding them. Then, he lay down beside the prey and enjoyed a fresh dinner in satisfaction. The 5 female lions stood at the side, pacing back and forth. They were exhausted and hungry, but they could only drool. Little Curly Tail ran to his mother's side and shouted. Arish looked at him lovingly. She had no choice but to lie on the ground and feed him with milk. Her injured front leg was trembling slightly. Chu Hao stood on a branch and quietly watched this cold-blooded and selfish scene filled with motherly love. He climbed down from the tree and walked over to the lion who was chowing down. He was about to bite a piece of meat for his mother. However, before he could get close, his father suddenly raised his claw and slapped him on the head, causing him to fall to the ground. He let out an angry and low growl, his gaze cold and merciless. Chu Hao was in pain and furious. The lioness hunted hard and nurtured the lion's offspring, while the lion enjoyed the fruits of their labor. It had just eaten its fill in the morning, and at night, it was still snatching such a pitiful amount of food from the lioness. Damn it! He knew that this was the rule of the pride of lions. There was no way to change it. However, he could not tolerate it. PFFT, he suddenly got up, stuck up his butt, and faced his father, the lion who was slowly chewing his food and let out a loud and melodious fart. Black smoke came out from his butt. Recently, he always felt that there were always these kinds of stinky farts in his body that he could release whenever he wanted to. It was very satisfying. An extremely strong stench instantly assaulted the lion's head and it gluttonous mouth. Ouch! But, the lion jumped up on the spot. At the same time, he spat out the flesh that he had just eaten. After Chu Hao finished farting, he ran away. He moved his limbs and ran very quickly. He dashed to the side of the big tree and jumped up, quickly climbing onto a branch. The lion chased after him furiously. He raised his head and stood under the tree, baring his fangs and glaring at him fiercely. The 5 female lions immediately took this opportunity to snatch the food. Soon, the small warthog was eaten clean by the hungry lioness. The lion was flustered and exasperated, but did not dare to do anything to the 5 female lions. After all, these female lions were his source of food. He could only raise his head and roar angrily at Chu Zhaohui for a while before leaving resentfully. Little Curly Tail's admiration for his brother was like a torrential river that flowed endlessly. It was like the overflowing of the Yellow River that could not be stopped. He even dared to tease his father. He was so awesome. The female lions ate some food. Although they could not satiate their hunger, it was better than nothing. They all lay down and started feeding the cubs. Aisha raised her head and looked at Chu Zhaohui on the tree. Her eyes were filled with love and gentleness as she softly called him down to eat. Kisiar looked at Chu Zhaohui with a mother gaze filled with love and gentleness as well. When Chu Zhaohui saw that the lion had gone far away, he climbed down the tree and walked to Aisha's side. He lay down and helped his mother lick the wound on her leg. At this moment, the knight and the lions were quiet and peaceful. After the female lions and the young cubs fell asleep, Chu Zhaohui climbed down a big tree and lay down on a thick branch. He fell asleep while feeling very tired. The tree gave him a greater sense of security than the ground. But he had forgotten the importance of teamwork. He even forgot that he was still young. It was not a good idea for a young cub to sleep alone. Just as he was sleeping soundly, a dark head popped out from the dense foliage above him. The head was triangular, flat and huge. Under the cold moonlight, its eyes flickered with an icy cold light. It was a python. Although it was not very big, it was nearly 3 meters long. It spat out its scarlet tongue, raised its head, and slid down. Its thick and long body quickly wrapped Chu Zhaohui's small body around the tree trunk. Then, it slowly tightened. Chu Zhaohui suddenly woke up. A stench assaulted him. At the same time, he felt intense pain all over his bones. He also found it increasingly difficult to breathe. He opened his eyes and was shocked to see a ferocious-looking python spitting its scarlet tongue at him. And his small body was already tightly wrapped around the branch by this python's thick and long body. Roar! He hurriedly opened his mouth and struggled to make a weak cry for help. But the voice was too soft so the lioness did not hear it. The python's body tightened. That scarlet snake tongue seemed to be mocking and ridiculing him as it shook on his face without restraint. Chu Zhaohui was shocked, anxious, and furious, but he felt powerless and could not resist at all. His breathing became more and more difficult. All the bones in his body were almost crushed. He began to despair. When he was a human, he was most afraid of snakes. He did not expect to die in the stomach of a snake after becoming a lion. How ironic. He, a majestic lion, had yet to become a lion king, had yet to expand his territory, had yet to have a group of wives and concubines, and was about to die before he could conquer the world. How humiliating. When pythons hunted animals, they would first strangle the animals with their bodies, then open their mouths and swallow them slowly. Chu Zhaohui already found it extremely hard to breathe. In this moment of despair, the strange heat in his abdomen started to become restless and quickly spread throughout his body. The pain in his body suddenly lessened. His limbs were full of strength. However, he was tightly bound by the python's thick and long body. With his small body, he could not break free no matter how much strength he had. At this moment, he suddenly realized that, although his neck was tightly strangled and he could no longer breathe, he was still conscious. His consciousness was exceptionally clear. His heart gradually stopped beating. It was as if he had cultivated the turtle breathing technique. Even though he was not breathing or his heart was not beating, his mind was still clear. However, this was not a solution. In this situation, he did not know how long he could last. He could not wait forever. Even if the lioness woke up, they might not be able to save him. Therefore, he could only rely on himself. He closed his eyes and slowly relaxed his body. He did not move, did not breathe, and did not have a heartbeat. He pretended that he had been strangled and fainted. Indeed. The python tightened its grip for a while before releasing its body. At the same time, it opened its bloody mouth and tried to swallow his head. Roar! Chu Zhaohui suddenly jumped up, opened his mouth, and bit down hard on its jaw. A python did not have venomous fangs. Even if they had venomous fangs, he could only risk his life. Kai. Although his teeth were small, they were exceptionally sharp. They instantly pierced through the python's lower jaw. The python's huge mouth was no longer able to close. It was in so much pain that its head swayed and its body started to twist violently. That thick body wrapped around Chu Zhaoyi once again. However, Chu Zhaoyi bit its lower jaw furiously. Those 2 rows of sharp teeth seemed to be embedded in it and did not move at all. If the python were to use brute force and fall from the tree with Chu Zhaoyi would probably faint and become its meal again. However, in its anger and pain, it used its thick body to wrap Chu Zhaoyi tightly around the branch again, wanting to strangle him to death. It never would have thought that its massive killing power, which even a mature lion would be afraid of, would not be able to crush this young cub's body, let alone kill it. The snake and the lion were in a deadlock on the tree, biting and strangling each other, neither willing to let go. The night quietly passed. When the sky in the east began to turn white and dawn arrived, the python's thick and long body suddenly loosened and it fell from the tree. Its jaw was still dripping with blood as Chu Zhaoyi bit on it and did not let go. It fell into the grass and died with a grievance. Chapter 9. Crisis After Dawn. When little Curly Tail woke up and wagged his tail to look for his brother, he suddenly let out a scream and turned to run. The 5 female lions were awakened. The few little cubs also woke up in confusion. When the female lions came under the tree, they were immediately shocked by what they saw. Under the tree, a thick patterned python flicked its belly and died in the grass. Its body was intact and there were no wounds or bloodstains. However, the lower half of its mouth was nowhere to be seen. On the tree, the 6-month-old male cub was sleeping soundly. Its mouth and neck were covered in blood. The lower half of the python's mouth was on the branch beside him, dripping with blood. The 5 female lions raised their heads and looked dazed. The cubs ran over one after another. They were all frightened by the python on the ground and cowered behind the female lions. Mama shivered and crawled under Kissier. Little Curly Tail was much bolder. Although this kid had been shocked when he first saw the python, he now dared to approach it. He even extended his little claws to slap the head of python that had died with a grievance. The bloody smell of the python stimulated the hungry lioness. Although the 5 female lions did not know how this python's chin was bitten off by a young cub, this did not stop them from filling their hungry stomachs with it. Although this python was not too big, it was rather long and its entire body was made of flesh. It was enough for every lion to eat a few bites. Taking advantage of the absence of the male lion, the 5 female lions immediately ate heartily. The cubs stood at the side, not daring to go forward. Only little Curly Tail took a bite of the bloody snake tail. But he immediately spat it out with a look of disdain. He probably could not get used to this meaty thing. Lions generally did not eat snakes, nor would they provoke snakes unless they were too hungry. In less than a moment, an entire python was devoured by the 5 female lions. However, their stomachs were not full, and they still had to feed the cubs. After patrolling the territory, the lion would return to eat. Hence, the female lions had to go out to hunt. Initially, they had wanted to continue letting the blind Kissier stay to take care of the cubs. After all, she seemed to be severely injured yesterday and was on the verge of death. However, Kissier insisted on hunting. She even ran in front of the 4 female lions and jumped a few times to show that she could do it. She did not want her friends and daughter to look down on her. Finally, Arisha stayed. When she was hunting last night, her front leg was injured. Although her wound had already healed and she no longer felt any pain. After the 4 female lions left, Arisha lifted her injured leg and looked at it carefully. She even licked it a few times. It seemed strange. When she was injured in the past, she could not recover so quickly. Roar! Little Curly Tail raised his head and shouted at Chu Zhaoyi, who was on the tree. He wanted his brother to play with him. However, Chu Zhaoyi was lying motionless on the branch. He had almost exhausted all his energy last night and was very tired now. He wanted to sleep. Arisha looked up, thought for a while, and then lay down under the tree. She raised her neck and looked wearily at the 7 young cubs around her. Seeing that his brother was ignoring him, little Curly Tail could only start sprinting towards the tree. He wanted to climb up the tree to wake him up. but after trying several times, he gave up halfway. Mai also started to sprint. She failed the first time. The second time, she managed to charge up in one move. However, just as the little lioness steadied herself on a branch, she suddenly saw the mouth of the python. She immediately let out a terrified scream and almost fell from the tree. Her entire body trembled non-stop. Chu Xiao was woken up by her and did not have any protective fittings for the fairer sex. He slapped her on the head, got up, climbed down to a higher branch, and continued to sleep. Mai was terrified by the half of the python's mouth. She saw that his mouth was full of blood and he looked ferocious. She did not dare to stay on the tree any longer and immediately retreated from the tree while trembling. Little Curly Tail was recalcitrant and continued to charge towards the big tree. Finally, he climbed up. When he saw the half of the python's mouth on the branch, to show off in front of Mai, he bit it in his mouth and deliberately lowered his head. Looking at Mai, who was still trembling under the tree, he started chewing with relish. Mai did not dare to look anymore. She turned around and ran, jumping onto the small tree beside her. Little Curly Tail was very pleased. Although he felt a little disgusted, he still ate the half of the python's mouth. Roar. He looked up and called Chu Xiao a few times, but there was no response. Just as he was about to continue climbing, Chu Xiao suddenly spread his hind legs and started peeing on the tree. The urine splashed accurately on a Little Curly Tail's head. Little Curly Tail was shocked and angry. He hurriedly shook his head and retreated from the tree. He ran to his mother and complained. The urine flowed from the tree. Arisha also got up in a hurry and shifted some distance away. She looked up at the tree with a helpless expression. On the small tree, Mai was wagging her tail and jumping around with a gloating expression. Little Curly Tail was so angry that he wanted to go up and beat her up. Mai immediately blocked him at the first branch and prevented him from going up. The 1-year-old male cub, Lars, brought the other cubs over to play with Little Curly Tail. Little Curly Tail ignored this big brother and walked away arrogantly. He went to hit the small bugs in the grass. Seeing Mai in the tree, Lars suddenly thought of the dangerous situation yesterday. When the hyenas attacked yesterday, the female cub had climbed up the tree very quickly. Meanwhile, as the big brother, he could not manage to climb up no matter how hard he tried. If not for his half-brother using his head to push him up, he would have been eaten by the hyenas. Thinking of this, he turned his head and looked at the boy sleeping on the big tree beside him. He was secretly grateful and impressed. No, as the elder brother, how can I be weaker than the other younger brothers? He immediately called out to his brothers and sisters behind him, telling them to follow him and practice climbing trees. At a crucial moment, if he wanted to live, he had to rely on himself. Hence, the group of cubs started to practice climbing trees. The ferocious hyenas from yesterday had frightened them badly. It was safer on the tree. Chu Xiao had thought the same previously. However, after experiencing the nightmare last night, he realized that whether it was on the tree or under the tree, it would not be absolutely safe. The safest way was to be strong. Roar, with a low growl, the lion paced back majestically. Arisha quickly stood up and went over to rub his head. What she got in return was a cold gaze and an impatient roar. The lion was hungry. He ate the most yesterday and did not do much vigorous exercise. He could have gone hungry for a few more days. However, the rainy season and the abundant food it brought with it had already spoiled him. He was used to having fresh meat every day. Arisha looked into the distance and was secretly worried. Last night, the 4 female lions ran very far before they found their prey. After chasing for a long time, they did not succeed. In the end, they only caught a small warthog. She wondered if Kissir and the others would be able to return with plenty of prey today. If they failed again, their king would be furious. And their children would also go hungry. She hoped that the rainy season could be extended and that the dry season would not arrive so soon. After all, their children were still young and needed to be fed with abundant food. Although it was morning, the air was still hot. The lion lay on a slope, looking at the distant grassland with a dignified gaze while waiting for the lioness to return from hunting. On the tree, Chu Xiao was still sleeping soundly. Chapter 10. Impudent. Until noon. The 4 female lions returned. They hung their heads dejectedly and returned empty-handed. They did not catch a single prey. The lion stood up from the hill and roared angrily and disappointedly at them as if he was reprimanding them. The 4 female lions lowered their heads and walked to their cubs to lie down. They were exhausted and dejected as they fed them milk. Kisiar lay under the tree and called for Mimi. Mimi had just climbed down from the tree when the lion suddenly ran over and slapped her to the ground. It roared angrily and bared its fangs at Kisiar, biting her. He blamed Kisiar for not catching any prey. If she was blind in one eye, why did she go and be a burden to the team? The lion's sharp fangs were mercilessly tearing at the pitiful lions. Kisiar opened her mouth and lay on the ground, begging for mercy as she struggled helplessly. Mimi was crawling in the grass. Her head was hurting and she was shivering. The other lioness panicked and looked at their sister with pity. However, none of them dared to stop the furious Leo. When a lion gets angry, all the lions tremble. The cubs who were drinking milk were also scared out of their wits. They trembled and hid in the lioness' arms. On the tree, Chu Zhaoi, who was sleeping, was woken up by the roar of the lion and the cry of Alliance. He looked down. His father was baring his fangs and brandishing his sharp claws at Kisiar. She could only beg for mercy as she lay on the ground, her face and head covered in bloody scratches. The other lioness, including his mother, paced nervously in place, not daring to stop him. Mimi crawled in the grass with her body trembling as she cried out in fear and anxiety. Chu Zhaoi's sleepiness instantly vanished. He hurriedly climbed down from the tree. The moment he landed, he ran towards his father without hesitation. While the lion was furiously beating Shi-er, he quietly approached from behind and bit the lion's tail. Then, he turned around and ran. With a whoosh, he jumped onto the small tree beside him. Roar! The lion was caught off guard and jumped up in pain. With a roar, it turned around and chased towards the tree. It raised its head and roared angrily at the tree with a fierce and terrifying look. The injured Shi-er took this opportunity to get up from the ground and flee into the distance. Now that the lion was furious, if she did not escape, she might be bitten to death by the Leo. She could only return after the lion left. She looked at her daughter sadly and quickly disappeared into the bushes in the distance. It was not their fault that they did not catch any prey today. They searched the grassland for a long time, but they did not see any prey that they could catch. They finally found a herd of water buffaloes after a long while and prepared to ambush the lone calf. However, they were discovered by the herd of water buffaloes and fled in panic, almost dying under their hooves. The fact that she was blind in one eye did affect her ability to hunt. However, her speed and courage were definitely not inferior to that of other female lions. If she had not split up with the other 3 female lions and deliberately changed directions to lure away the water buffaloes, the furious water buffaloes would have chased them here and the tragedy of cubs being trampled to death by a herd of water buffaloes would be repeated. She did not do anything wrong today. However, the selfish and overbearing lion had blamed everything on her. Just because she was blind in one eye? Why was she blind in one eye? Wasn't it because she was the first to jump up and bite the throat of the prey and the other lioness did not follow up in time that she got injured? Wasn't it all for the lion, for the children, and to get food for the pride? She walked alone and helplessly through the bushes. The wounds on her face from being bitten and scratched by the lion were burning, and her heart was cold. However, for the sake of her child, she had no choice but to continue to work hard, live on, and try to please her cold and heartless king. The hard wind blew and the withered grass on the grassland rose and fell like waves, just like her current mood. On that small tree, Chu Zhaoi stood on the highest branch with his head lowered. He looked at the lion that was still roaring angrily under the tree and unwilling to leave. His eyes were filled with disdain. Aisha went up to the lion and tried to beg for mercy for her child. However, the lion slapped her face and she retreated in fear. Little Curly Tail stood not far away and raised his head to look at his brother. He was both worried and impressed. His brother was really impressive. He even dared to bite his father's tail. The lion growled angrily under the tree for a while before leaving in anger. He lay back on the hill and closed his eyes to rest. He would not actually chase Kisiar away by biting her. The pride had few female lions to begin with. Even if Kisiar was blind in one eye, she was still useful. At least she could stay at home to take care of her child. As for Chu Zhaoyi, he would not actually kill the staring little cub. After all, he was his child. Most importantly, although she was afraid of him, if he really would have bite her child to death, this female lion would definitely retaliate and even provoke the other female lions to retaliate. At that time, he would be all alone and the gains would not make up for the losses. However, it was still necessary to teach them some lessons. Kissier had already learned her lesson. She must be terrified and ashamed now. The next time she hunted, she would definitely work even harder. As for the boy on the tree who dared to disrespect his father, he had yet to be taught a lesson. The lion decided that the next time he ate fresh meat, he would teach this brat a good lesson. He must let him know that his father's dignity was not to be challenged. Without his father's permission and mercy, he could forget about eating a single piece of meat. Here, he was the king, the supreme king. No one could be disobedient or presumptuous. He yawned, lowered his head, and decided to take a nap. At night, he would lead the female lions hunt. On the small tree, Chu Zhaoyi stared at him for a long time on the branch. Seeing that he was really asleep, he climbed down from the tree and ran into his mother's arms to drink milk. He had fought with the python for a long time last night and was terrified. His stomach was already rumbling with hunger. Arisha lay on her side and looked at him lovingly. She stuck out her tongue and licked his head to show her affection and love for him. Little Curly Tail walked over carefully and rubbed his head against his body with admiration and respect. It was as if he was saying, "Big brother, you're the best." Little brother's respect for you is like a torrential river that never ends. It's like the overflowing of the yellow river that can't be stopped. Min also came over, drooling as she watched Chu Zhaoyi drink milk. Her mother had escaped and she had yet to eat. She was so hungry. Arisha looked at her gently and raised her hind legs as if she was encouraging her. She seemed to be saying, "Come little girl, come and eat." Mama immediately leaned over happily. Little Curly Tail immediately raised his claws and wanted to chase her away. However, just as he raised his claws, Chu Zhaoyi slapped him onto the ground and made way for Mimi. Little Curly Tail crawled on the ground and cried out in grievance. However, he did not dare to hit Mimi again. Obviously, her brother was protecting this little girl. He dared to bully the other cubs in the pride, including the eldest brother, Lars, who was already 1 year old. However, he did not dare to provoke his older brother. It was not just because his brother could let out really smelly farts. Over the past few days, his brother's actions had completely impressed and daunted him. Chapter 11. The Three Siblings After Eating. Chu Zhaoyi climbed up the tree and prepared to exercise. When he saw the bloodstains on the branch, he recalled the terrifying scene last night with lingering fear. If he had not pretended to be dead and deceived that python, his corpse would have already rotted in the python's stomach by now. Although the python was not too big, it was definitely terrifying for the young Chu Zhaoyi. If it was a young cub who was in that situation instead, its bones would definitely be broken and it would suffocate to death. However, he did not. Although it was painful when the python coiled around his body, his bones and muscles seemed to be able to withstand the terrifying strangulation force. After that, when the strange heat in his lower abdomen rose, the pain was greatly reduced. Furthermore, he did not need to breathe and his consciousness became very clear. His young body seemed to have been modified. Not only did his bones and muscles become much stronger, but he was also able to withstand the python's strangulation and hold his breath for a long time. Of course, there was also the magical function of his saliva. It seemed that there was a reason why he had been farting and passing out black fests these few days. He was probably excreting the impurities that had been cleared out of his body after his body had been modified. What was that warm current in his stomach? He could not understand. He did not want to waste time thinking about it. Anyway, that heat was extremely beneficial to his current survival. He decided to try holding his breath again. He had held his breath for about 7 to 8 minutes last night. It was those 7 to 8 minutes that saved his life. It would be even better if he could hold his breath for a longer period of time in the future. He took a deep breath and started holding his breath. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. 5 minutes later. He could not hold it in anymore. Although he did not hold his breath for as long as he did last night, 5 minutes was enough to beat all the other lions. His body had indeed been modified. He decided to add the ability to hold his breath to the list of abilities he needed to train. If he practiced twice a day, he would definitely be able to extend how long he could hold his breath for. He would definitely be able to dig out the potential he had last night. He climbed down from the tree and began to practice climbing trees. From the first branch to the second branch, he slowly moved upwards until he reached the softest canopy. When climbing a tree, he could also train his muscles, agility, and speed. He could also train his heart and lungs. Not long after, he started panting. However, compared to yesterday and the day before yesterday, he felt that his strength and endurance had increased a lot. He continued practicing. Little Curly Tail and Mai slept for a while. When they woke up, they joined in on the fun. Mai's talent in climbing trees was not just for show. When Chuzhaoi climbed up to the canopy for the third time, the female cub also climbed up while panting. Although she looked a little scared, she was more excited. Standing on the tree, she could see everything in the grassland. Little Curly Tail was a little clumsy. However, this brat never admitted defeat. No matter how many times he failed, he continued practicing. Furthermore, he was extremely bold. There was once when he nearly fell off the third branch. He only had one claw on the branch, and his life was hanging by a thread. In the end, when Chuzhaoi saved him, not only did he not retreat, he even continued to climb even higher. Finally, in the evening, he successfully climbed up to the canopy. Chuzhaoi admired his courage and perseverance. The three little cubs stood at the highest point of the big tree, welcoming the fiery red sunset. They looked at the beautiful scenery on the grassland with high spirits. It was as if they could see the future. Two majestic lions and a beautiful female lion were running on the vast and beautiful grassland. All the animals and enemies were terrified by the scene and avoided at them. Roar, Little Curly Tail was excited. He could not help but raise his head and shout. However, his childish voice immediately ruined the atmosphere. Arisha paced restlessly under the tree. She raised her head and let out anxious and worried cries, calling for the three naughty children to come down quickly. They were too high up. She was afraid. Kissier came back with wounds on her face. She timidly glanced at the lion on the hill not far away, then looked up at her daughter on the tree. When Mai saw her mother return, she immediately climbed down the tree carefully. In the evening, it was time to go out and hunt. The male lion stood up from the hill and let out an impatient roar. He looked at the female lions with a dignified gaze. Kissier stayed to take care of the cubs. The other four female lions set out to hunt. Their shriveled stomachs and silent and neat steps seemed to be filled with a sense of tragedy under the setting sun. Chuzhaoi stood on the tree and watched the scene quietly. A sense of respect and pity welled up in his heart. Be it animals or humans, mothers always had it the most difficult and carried the most responsibility. Under the tree, a group of little cubs were still feeling carefree and playing around excitedly. Perhaps they only thought that their mothers would be able to bring back delicious food so long as they left. However, they did not know just how much risk their mothers took. Some mothers might never come back after leaving. Some turned into white bones. Some did not even have bones left. This kind of cruel and cold tragedy was happening all the time on this beautiful grassland. Kissier patrolled the surrounding bushes vigilantly, afraid that those despicable hyenas would take the opportunity to attack again. The lion lay lazily on the hill, not wanting to move. He only wanted to wait for the food, eat, and then continue sleeping. The little cubs were playing under the tree. Chuzhaoi continued to do all sorts of strange actions on the tree. He was so diligent that even he himself was surprised. Mai and Little Curly Tail watched in a daze for a while, then curiously followed suit. The sun soon set. The lion stood up from the hill and paced impatiently, looking coldly at the distant grassland. Kissier stood not far away and looked at him timidly, not daring to approach. Night fell. Darkness shrouded the vast grassland. But their eyes could still see very far. In the distance, the four female lions had yet to return. The young cubs, who had been playing all afternoon, were now hungry. They quietened down and waited anxiously for their mothers. Chuzali stood on the canopy and looked at the dark grassland. He suddenly had an ominous feeling. Mai climbed down the tree and went to her mother to drink milk. Little Curly Tail had been exercising for the entire afternoon, and his stomach was already rumbling with hunger. He also shamelessly followed her. Kissiar lay down and looked lovingly at the two young cubs. She then raised her head and looked at Chuzali on the tree. She softly called for him to come down and eat. Chuzali looked into the distance and did not respond. He was worried about his mother and the other three mothers. Chapter 12. Hunger. The night grew darker. In the distant horizon, the figures of the 4 female lions finally appeared. Chuzali stood at the top of the tree and could not help but let out a childish roar. He finally heaved a sigh of relief. Although the 4 female lions did not seem to have brought back any prey, the lion stood up from the grass and raised its head, looking into the distance with a dignified gaze. His tail that was shaking anxiously suddenly stopped. He saw it. The lioness returned empty-handed. This meant that he still had nothing to eat tonight. The lion let out a hoarse growl and bared its teeth, looking very angry. Not long after, the 4 female lions returned dejectedly. Every female lion had scratch marks and bloodstains on her body. There was a lioness whose tail had been cut off. She hung her head and looked extremely miserable. They searched for a long time and finally found prey at the edge of the territory. However, while hunting, they accidentally crossed the border and entered the territory of another pride. The prey that they had painstakingly caught was snatched away. Under the leadership of the male lion, the opposing pride angrily attacked and bit them. They did not want to give up their prey, but they could only flee. Otherwise, they would lose their lives. If their lion was here, perhaps the prey could be brought back. Looking at the hungry children, and the lion roaring angrily, the 4 female lions lowered their heads, feeling guilty and sad. The lioness, whose tail had been bitten off, lowered her head and wanted to rub against the lion's body as an apology. However, she was slapped in the face by the lion, coldly and heartlessly. The 4 female lions were riddled with scars, tired and hungry, but they had no choice but to lie down beside their cubs and feed them. The lion looked at them coldly before turning to leave. Soon, he disappeared into the night. Since the female lions were useless, he could only take advantage of the night to find something to eat. Chuzali stood on the tree and watched his cold figure leave coldly. Due to the lush mane of male lions, it was extremely easy for their prey to discover them when they hunted during the day. Before they could approach, the prey might have already sensed them and fled. Therefore, in a pride, the lionesses were usually in charge of hunting. When there was a lack of food, prides would take the risk to hunt large and dangerous animals like giraffes and water buffaloes. At this time, the lion would help. When the prey was surrounded by the lioness, the lion would suddenly pounce on them and bite their necks, using their heavy bodies to drag the prey to the ground. Then, the lioness could pounce on them together to kill them. As for Chuzali's pride, he had never seen the lion hunting with the female lions ever since he could remember. Even if he had not eaten for a few days. Although he had just become a cub, the past was still imprinted in his body's memory. In his memory, this majestic father was more cold and selfish than any other father. Of course, he was also lazy. Roar! Arisha called out to him from under the tree. Chuzali looked down and saw that little Curly Tail was already lying beside his mother and drinking milk. This kid had just eaten at Kissiar's place, and now he was eating again. It seemed like the afternoon training had really tired him out. Although he sympathized with his mother's hunger and fatigue, Chuzali still climbed down from the tree and went to eat. Only when he was full could he grow up and become stronger. Only by being strong could he protect his mother and help her share her burdens and responsibilities. As for that cold father, he could not be counted on. He only hoped that he could guard his territory well, defeat those invaders, and fulfill his duties as a father and husband slightly. The night was hazy. After eating their fill, the cubs all leaned against their mothers and fell asleep. As for the 5 female lions, they were frowning and did not feel sleepy at all. The water sources nearby started to dry up. The herbivores were already migrating. The prey on this grassland seemed to have disappeared overnight and it was difficult to find them again. If they wanted to continue hunting and nurturing their children, they could only follow their prey and migrate to the edge of the territory to settle down. But it was very dangerous there. Not only were there other prides, there were also many other carnivores. If the cubs lived there, they would be threatened every day. However, if they did not move, they could only starve every day. Even if they could occasionally catch prey, they, who needed to feed their children, and the strong male lion, could not eat their fill. If they could not fill their stomachs, they would not have the strength to hunt or nurture their children. If the lion could not eat its fill, if a wandering lion invaded or they encountered a sneak attack by those vile hyenas, he would probably be defeated and flee, or die in defeat. But then, none of their children would survive. So, at this moment, the 5 female lions looked at each other in the dark. They were silent, but they were thinking about the migration of the herbivores. But they were also worried about the children. The complex thoughts of the 5 mothers were revealed in their eyes even though they did not express them. The night was silent. Chuzhao was still sleeping on the tree. The python from last night had indeed frightened him quite a bit. However, he might be able to survive against a python. However, if he were to face a lion or some other carnivore, the current him would definitely not be able to resist. He had angered the lion during the day. Although that lion was his father, he was not sure if he would take advantage of him sleeping to suddenly rush over and bite him to death. A lion was violent and heartless. Whether it was on television or in his past memories, he remembered them deeply. Furthermore, his father was currently hungry. Hence, he only dared to sleep on the tree. The female lions could not sleep, and neither could he. Although there was a strange and powerful beat in his body emitting a strange heat that made him completely reborn and gradually become stronger. However, he was still a cub and was not really strong. If he encountered danger, he would still be unable to protect himself. The situation of the pride was already very dangerous. Without food, they had to move. Whether it was on the road or in the new residence, it was full of unknown dangers for cubs like them. If they were not careful, they would become food for other carnivores. He was lucky that he did not die and turned into a leon. He wanted to grow into a majestic lion and flaunt his might on the grassland. He wanted to dominate the world. His dream had yet to be realized. How could he die so quickly? Roar. While he was lost in his thoughts, he heard a childish roar. Mai climbed up the tree and lay beside him. The scent of milk on the lion's cub and her gentle and obedient appearance instantly made him feel much less depressed. Who cares? No matter how difficult tomorrow was, he would try his best to live every day well. Chuzhao rubbed her head with his claws and a human-like smile appeared on his face. The night was quiet and the moonlight was gentle. The siblings laid quietly on the tree and fell asleep. Chapter 13, Viper Killer. After dawn, the lion had returned, and its stomach was rumbling with hunger. After running around for a long time last night, he did not find any food. Under his hoarse and impatient growl, the 4 female lions bid farewell to the cubs and continued their hunt. The lions with a broken tail stayed behind to look after the cubs. Chuzhao woke up very early. He stood on a big tree, welcoming the fiery red dawn. After watching the lioness leave, he began to repeat all kinds of strange actions. When Mai woke up, she followed suit. Seeing that the lion's cub had sneaked onto the tree to play with his older brother, Little Curly Tail climbed up hurriedly as well and brushed her away from his older brother rudely. "This is my brother." His angry look seemed to be saying this. He could not allow this timid and cunning lion's cub to snatch his brother's love away from him. Little Curly Tail bared his teeth admitting. After threatening her, he immediately followed Chuzhao and did those strange actions. After a while, he was panting from exhaustion. Minna ignored him and stood on a nearby branch, practicing Chuzhao's movements seriously. Although she did not know the meaning of these actions, she trusted Chuzhao very much. His training of tree climbing back then was very good proof. Hence, no matter what this brother did, she would follow. Soon, she was so tired that her muscles were trembling and her entire body was aching. She had no strength left. After a short rest, she pulled herself together and continued to do it. Although Little Curly Tail was also very tired and wanted to go down to rest or play, since this lion's cub was not afraid of fatigue, he naturally could not admit defeat, as he could not let his brother look down on him. Therefore, he worked even harder than before. Chu Xiaoyu looked at the two kids and smiled. He lowered his head and looked down at the other cubs. They were still playing around without any worries, as if they could not feel the impending danger. Lars, who was only a year old, was sprinting seriously at the small tree. The hyena from last time must have scared him quite a bit. Chu Xiaoyu thought for a moment, climbed down the tree, and walked over to the group of cubs who were playing. He let out a low growl, hoping that they could practice tree climbing with Lars. However, these cubs were having fun and no one bothered with him. Even a big brother like Lars could not control them, let alone a little brother like him who was ranked last. Yesterday, they had followed Lars for a while and felt that it was too difficult and boring, so they gave up. Chu Xiaoyu sighed in his heart. He turned around and saw that little curly tail and Mai had climbed down from the tree and were looking at him with trust and intimacy. Roar! He called out and decided to bring the two adorable little fellows to practice running. Speed and endurance could not only save their lives in times of danger, but also allow them to better capture prey in the future. 1, 2, 1. He shouted in his heart as he ran. In the end, he realized that his forelegs did not match the rhythm of this slogan. He almost did not know how to run. He could only give up. Little curly tail and Mai immediately followed behind him and started running. Chu Xiaoyu did not dare to run too far away and only ran around the surrounding bushes. When they passed by a dense patch of bushes on their second round, Mai, who was running, suddenly jumped up and fell to the ground. She let out a terrified scream as she rolled and crawled backwards. Chu Xiaoyu quickly stopped and ran over to check on the situation. Whoosh! In the grass, there was a black cobra with an oval head and bulging skin on its neck. It was standing upright and raised its head, emitting a terrifying threatening sound. Mai limped back in fright. The female cub had obviously been bitten. Chu Xiaoyu's heart sank. The cobra was extremely venomous. Even an adult lion would fear this venom, let alone a young cub. After a mature female lion was bitten, if there was not much venom, it might not be fatal. But after a young cub is bitten, it might very well die. Mai took a few steps back and was already lying on the ground. It was obvious that the poison had already contaminated her blood and was quickly entering our body through the blood. Chu Xiaoyu did not dare to delay any further. He hurriedly ran to her side and crawled in front of her. Without any explanation, he used his teeth to press against her wound and used the saliva in his mouth to wipe it. Mai lay on the ground shivering. She was clearly scared silly. Little curly tail bared his teeth and let out an angry and provocative roar. He faced the cobra and was ready to pounce on it. Chu Xiaoyu quickly turned around and growled, asking him to retreat. Little curly tail seemed to know how powerful this thing was. Just as he took 2 steps back, the cobra suddenly chased after him with a whoosh. Raising its head, it hissed and had an arrogant look full of conceit and pomp. Little curly tail was furious. He raised his claw and hit its head. The cobra tilted its head and nimbly dodged his claws. It opened its mouth and ferociously bit at him. Little curly tail hurriedly jumped back and narrowly dodged it. The cobra was very pleased with itself. Just as it was about to launch a second attack, the grass beside it suddenly moved. A black shadow suddenly jumped out like lightning and pounced on its head. Whoosh! The cobra's reaction was extremely fast. Its entire upper body hurriedly leaned back and narrowly avoided the black shadow. The black shadow landed on the ground without any fear and directly faced it. Its dark eyes were filled with excitement and desire. Its body was small and its head was flat. Its fur was rough and black and white. Its claws were extremely strong and sharp. It was the legendary brother flat type, the honey badger. Chu Xiaoyu turned to look and was secretly shocked. When the arrogant cobra saw this little thing that was even smaller than a cub, it turned around and slid away without hesitation. The venom it was so proud of did not affect this little thing. This was the famous viper killer who made vipers tremble in fear. Whoosh! When the cobra turned around to escape, the honey badger suddenly jumped up and pounced on it, biting its tail. Usually, when a honey badger hunted a venomous snake, it would attack head-on and bite its head and neck. This way, the venomous snake would die faster and would not continue attacking it. Although the body of a honey badger could resist the venom of a poisonous snake, no one wanted to be bitten a few more times. But now, this honey badger was biting the cobra's tail. It did not even think about the venomous fangs of the cobra and whether it would turn around and bite it. This was true arrogance. However, what was even more arrogant was yet to come. Perhaps the cobra was traumatized and fearful of this little thing. After being bitten in the tail, it did not turn around to bite. Instead, it continued to twist its body and escape. As for the honey badger, as it ran, it chewed on the cobra's tail and started to eat. Little Curly Tail was dumbfounded. Mama also widened her eyes in shock. What was this? How could it be more domineering than the lion of the grassland? That was probably what the siblings were thinking. Chapter 14. Saliva and Venom. After a moment, an entire cobra was devoured by the honey badger. Little Curly Tail was surprised to see this. He went forward and raised his claws, preparing to scratch the honey badger. He wanted to see why this little fellow was so powerful. Unexpectedly, not only did the honey badger not escape, it suddenly turned around, bared its teeth, and pounced at him. Little Curly Tail was frightened, but he did not run away. After taking a few steps back, he bared his teeth and aped it like he was going to pounce on it and bite it. The two little fellows faced each other like this, neither willing to be eaten. After Chujaori helped Mama suck out the venom in her wound, he smeared a lot of saliva on the wound. Then, he got up from the ground and called out to the lion's cub, wanting to see her condition. He was not sure if his saliva was effective against snake venom. If it was useless, this beautiful lion's cub would probably die. Mama tried to move her injured front leg and realized that her previously numb and powerless front leg seemed to have recovered. She was delighted and hurriedly got up from the ground, standing steadily. Then, she walked a few more times and even jumped a few times. She actually did not feel any pain or helplessness anymore, as if she was not injured. The lion's cub was extremely happy. She went in front of Chujaori and rubbed his head and body intimately. In fact, she even stuck out her tongue and prepared to lick his face. Chujaori slapped her head away with his claw and finally relaxed. After spitting a few more times, he turned around and looked at Little Curly Tail and the brother Flat Top. The two little fellows were baring their teeth. One took a step forward while the other took a step back. They advanced and retreated back and forth, each making threatening sounds, but none of them dared to attack easily. Chujaori walked over and stood beside Little Curly Tail. Mama also walked over but did not show any ferocity. After all, this little thing just had to take revenge and eat the despicable cobra. Even when facing the three siblings, Brother Flat Top did not look afraid at all. He still bared his teeth and looked fierce. Chujaori saw that this fellow seemed to be underage and was even younger than a normal honey badger. However, his ferocious character, which was not afraid of death, was not much weaker than an adult honey badger. Seeing that they had the numerical advantage and that his brother was beside him, Little Curly Tail became bolder. He raised his claw and slapped the honey badger. The honey badger tilted its head and nimbly dodged it. Then, it was furious and pounced at Little Curly Tail with a whoosh. Bam! Before it could pounce any closer, Chujaori suddenly jumped up and slapped its head, causing it to fall to the ground miserably. Chujaori was shocked by his speed and strength. Little Curly Tail was overjoyed. Just as he was about to pounce on this little thing and beat it up, Chujaori slapped him on the head again. Little Curly Tail also fell to the ground. My strength has indeed increased a lot. Chujaori looked at his claws and was secretly excited. He did not seem to feel the least bit guilty about using his brother to experiment. Little Curly Tail crawled on the ground with tears in his eyes and a wronged expression. He did not understand why his brother wanted to hit him again. Chujaori ignored him and walked in front of Brother Flat Top with an eager expression. Brother Flat Top was agile and extremely fast. If he used it to practice his skills, he would definitely get twice the results with half the effort. He let out a roar and bared his sharp teeth in provocation at Brother Flat Top. He even raised his claws to stroke Brother Flat Top's head. To his surprise, the extremely ferocious and fearless Brother Flat Top turned around and ran away like it was a mouse that had seen a cat. With a whoosh, he crawled into two bushes full of thorns and disappeared. Chujaori was stunned for a moment. He looked at his claws in confusion. Were they that scary? Even the most daring animal in Africa was scared away by his claws. Little Curly Tail was still crawling on the ground, roaring and looking very pitiful. He felt dizzy and saw stars, as if he had been slapped silly by his brother. Chuzhou walked to his side, raised his claws, and rubbed his head. He let out a roar, as if he was ordering, "Get up!" Little Curly Tail hung his head, looking wrong, and did not move. Chuzhou walked behind him again and raised his claws, pretending to slap his butt. Little Curly Tail's expression changed as he jumped up hurriedly. His body swayed a few times before he could steady himself. Chuzhou felt guilty. It seemed that his claw was indeed a little vicious. No wonder Brother Flattop stopped playing with him. Mama went in front of him, her eyes full of admiration. She stuck out her little tongue again, wanting to lick his face. Chuzhou immediately turned around and aimed his butt at her. He curled his tail and prepared to fart. Mama was frightened and hurriedly ran away. Chuzhou glanced at her and dashed up the tree with a whoosh, continuing to practice his skills. His saliva could be used as a disinfectant and even antivenom. Hence, he could lick others. The female cub's saliva was useless. It was sticky and disgusting. He did not want to be leaked. Although he had just licked this girl's thigh. Mama also climbed up the tree and followed behind him eagerly. She mimicked his movements and started practicing, looking like a little fangirl. Little Curly Tail rested for a while under the tree and climbed up as well. However, he did not dare to get too close to his brother, as he was afraid that his brother would slap him again. He stood beside Mamai and started to practice these strange actions. Soon, all the muscles in his body started to heat up. Roar, the lion's roar sounded from a nearby mountain, seemingly filled with anger. Chuzhou stood on a big tree and looked up. On the distant horizon, the 4 female lions hung their heads and returned exhausted. They did not have any prey in their mouths. It seemed that they had returned empty-handed again. The lion paced angrily and anxiously on a slope, occasionally looking at the 4 female lions in the distance, and occasionally turning around to look at the cubs playing. His eyes were filled with iciness. The lion with a broken tail, who was watching over the children, suddenly stood up and looked at the lion wearily and nervously. She seemed to have keenly sensed something. Chuzhou's heart trembled. Could this guy be so hungry that he was going to eat his children? Or did he want to vent all his anger on cubs like them? A hot and dangerous aura came from the air. The cubs who were playing seemed to have sensed something. They quietened down. The lion stood on a slope, its mane flying and its empty stomach heaving slightly. Its gaze was terrifyingly cold. The air seemed to freeze in an instant. There was a strange silence. On the tree, Chuzhou's sharp claws sank deeply into the branches under him. Chapter 15. The baboon army. The sun was a little dazzling. Chuzhou stared nervously at the lion on the slope. Fortunately, the lion only growled angrily a few times and did not do anything out of line. Before the 4 female lions returned, he left coldly. No one knew if he went to find food personally or if he was angry and did not want to see the 4 female lions again. Not long after, the 4 female lions returned one after another. Looking at the young children, they did not care about their fatigue and hunger. They immediately lay down in the bushes and let the children eat. The little cubs rushed up happily. Arisha and Kissier came to the tree and lay down. They softly called for Chuzhou, Little Curly Tail and Mamai, who were on the tree. Little Curly Tail and Mamai were already hungry. They originally wanted to climb down the tree immediately, but they saw that Chuzhou was standing on the tree and did not move. Hence, the 2 little fellows hesitated for a moment and did not move again. Chuzhou looked at them and led them down the tree. As he ate his mother's sweet milk, Chuzhou felt a myriad of emotions. The cruelty of nature could only be truly experienced after becoming an animal. How many of these young mothers and young children could last until the rainy season next year? His mother still had plenty of milk, but her stomach had shriveled up a lot. Chuzhou looked at his claws and secretly thought about how he could help his mother share her sorrow. After eating, the little cubs were full of energy again and started playing around. The female lions lay in the bushes to rest. In the evening, after their stamina was restored, they would set out to hunt again. The 1-year-old Lars lay in the bushes dejectedly. The lion with a broken tail was his mother, and his mother no longer had milk. He had already started eating meat long ago. Even if he could go and drink the milk of another lion, he would not be able to eat his fill. After all, he was a young lion that was growing and urgently needed fresh meat. Currently, he was just like the female lions. He was hungry and did not know what to fill his stomach with. He lay in the grass for a while, glanced at his brothers and sisters who were playing, and suddenly got up and walked towards the dense bushes. He felt that he could not wait for death. Since his mother did not catch any prey, he would hunt personally. The bushes nearby were full of small animals and birds. If he could catch a few, he might be able to fill his stomach. Although he was still underage, he was still very strong compared to those small animals. He had speed, sharp claws, and sharp teeth. Those small animals were no match for him. He wanted his mother and other brothers and sisters to see that without the lioness hunting, he, Lars, could still eat his fill. Taking advantage of his mother's distraction, he crawled into the dense bushes and walked into the distance. His heart was full of pride. He was a leon. Wherever they passed, birds would fly away and rats would flee. All sorts of small birds and animals would panic and flee. This increased his courage and ambition. As he walked, he came to a dense forest. A strange sound suddenly came from the forest. Lars pricked up his ears and immediately slowed down. He walked over carefully and looked through the gap in the grass. Not far ahead, there was a small animal that looked like a monkey standing on the ground. As the little animal was slightly smaller than him. At this moment, it was standing upright and crying out miserably. It looked around with a panicked and anxious look, as if it was looking for its mother. Lars was overjoyed. He hurriedly lowered his body, sheathed his claws, and quietly sneaked through the bushes. The little animal clearly did not realize the danger approaching and was still crying shrilly. It seemed like it was laughing, but also seemed like it was crying. Lars seemed to see a rich meal placed on his dining table, and also imagined his brothers and sisters looking at him with eyes full of admiration and envy. He was extremely excited. He slowed down his steps and tried not to make any noise as he quietly approached the small animal from behind. Whoosh! He suddenly increased his speed, rushed up, and jumped towards the small animal. The little monkey-like animal finally reacted. Just as it turned around, it was pounced onto the ground by Lars, and let out a shrill and terrified scream. Lars bit its neck and laughed in his heart. He dragged it into the bushes. He decided to eat half first, then bring the other half back for his mother to eat. However, before he could enter the bushes, he heard a loud and angry roar behind him. Roars came one after another from all directions. Immediately, it was extremely noisy and ear-piercing. Countless sounds of running and jumping could be heard, as if it was the beast type he had seen with his mother previously. Lars was shocked and hurriedly turned his head to look. He was terrified by what he saw. A dense group of large monkeys ran out of the forest behind him. They bared their fangs and growled angrily. They charged out as a mighty formation and looked fierce as they pounced at him. There were so many of them that Lars could not make out exactly how many there were. The fangs that were revealed were thick, long, sharp, and terrifying. Lars was scared out of his wits. He did not dare to hesitate and hurriedly threw down the prey in his mouth and fled. The terrifying animals that looked like monkeys did not intend to let him go. They roared in anger and chased after him. Lars was shocked, afraid, anxious, and regretful. As he ran for his life, he shouted for help with all his might. At this moment, the female lions were resting. As for Chu Zhaoi, he was training his muscles with Little Curly Tail and Mai and the tree. Suddenly, he looked up and saw that the bushes not far away were rising and falling. They were shaking continuously and densely packed figures were surging over like a tidal wave. At the same time, terrifying roars could be heard. In front of those figures, a cub was running towards them with all its might. The little cub was his older brother, Lars, who was 1 year old. And when he looked carefully, the things chasing behind him were actually a group of huge baboons. Baboons lived in groups. Every tribe was made up of at least dozens of them. Some large tribes even had hundreds of members. They were omnivores that ate both plants and small animals. Their teeth were sharp and they had a fierce personality. Due to their massive tribes, even lions did not dare to provoke them easily. At this moment, seeing such a large group of baboons following behind Lars with murderous intent and charging towards the pride, Chu Zhao was stunned. He hurriedly shouted in alarm towards the bottom of the tree. The female lions had long heard the noise. They stood up and roared as they rushed up. They stood together and protected the young cubs behind them. Lars' mother, the lions with a broken tail, charged forward bravely and stopped a male baboon that was about to pounce on Lars. However, when she saw the dense baboon army behind her, she was shocked and hurriedly ran back with Lars. The other lioness did not dare to stay any longer after seeing the scene. They hurriedly brought their cubs and fled towards the grassland. Only male lion, their king, could deter these furious baboons. They only had 5 female lions, but they had so many young cubs to protect. They were up against 50 to 60 baboons. Moreover, they were extremely furious. They probably could not even protect themselves, so how could they protect the cubs? Arisha and Kissir hurriedly roared at the 3 siblings on the tree, telling them to come down and escape. Just as little Curly Tail and Mama were about to go down, they saw that Chu Zhao did not move. The siblings hesitated for a moment, then immediately stopped on the tree and stopped going down. Arisha and Kissir roared again in anxiety. Seeing that the baboon army was filled with killing intent and was about to attack, Chu Zhao was even more anxious. He hurriedly roared at his mother and Kissir, who were under the tree, to let them leave quickly. The baboons ran extremely quickly. Perhaps the lioness could escape, but the cubs definitely could not. Rather than being killed on the ground and implicating his mother, it was better to stay on the tree and take a risk. Perhaps those baboons did not know that they were on the tree. Although Aisha and Kissir were anxious and worried, they had no choice but to turn around and flee with the other lionists. They hoped to use themselves as bait to lure away the baboons. Chu Zhao, Little Curly Tail and Mai lowered their bodies and lay motionless on the dense branches. Aisha and Kissir looked back, relaxed, and focused on escaping. But the other cubs soon slowed down. Chapter 16. Brother is amazing. Whoosh. 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 Under the tree, the baboon army roared as they charged forward. They were like a dense and murderous human army that was charging forward with murderous intent. The 5 female lions brought up 5 young cubs and fled towards the grassland in panic. The Chu Zhao trio hid on the tree and watched the terrifying scene, not daring to move. Soon, the baboon army charged away, leaving behind a mess of bushes and grass. Little Curly Tail growled to show that he was not afraid at all. Chu Zhao could not stop him in time and heard a baboon's ear-piercing roar coming from under the tree. It turned out that there was still an old baboon that could not keep up with the main group. It fell behind and walked slowly. In the end, just as he walked out of the bushes, he heard Little Curly Tail roar from the tree. The old baboon looked up and saw that there were still 3 cubs hiding on the tree. He was overjoyed. Although he was already old and did not have the strength and agility of those young baboons, it was still easy to deal with such young cubs. Furthermore, the 3 little cubs were not hiding elsewhere, but on the tree. Looking at the 3 little cubs' young and tender bodies, the old baboon almost drooled. This kind of young cub must be crunchy when chewed. He let out an excited roar and climbed up the tree without hesitation. He used his limbs and quickly climbed up the branch. Mama was trembling in fear. Chu Zhao let out a roar and immediately brought her and Little Curly Tail to climb towards the highest canopy. The branches there were thin, soft, and able to withstand their weight. Moreover, there was also a branch that could be defended. With the old baboon's weight, he definitely did not dare to go up. Little Curly Tail and Mai followed behind him. They climbed very quickly and soon reached the highest canopy. Chu Zhao let them lie on the 2 soft branches while he turned around and climbed down. He looked down and guarded the second branch that led to the canopy. His gaze was fixed on the old baboon that was quickly climbing up. This place was about 7 to 8 meters above the ground. Regardless of whether it was the 3 young cubs or the old baboon, if they fell from here, they would be crippled even if they did not die. Therefore, at this moment, he tensed up and his muscles bulged. He decided to guard this branch to the death. The old baboon quickly climbed up, raised its head, and bared its fangs at him. It let out a threatening roar, as if it wanted to scare him into panicking and make him fall to his death. Chu Zhao looked at it coldly, unmoved. The old baboon was furious when it saw that the cub was so bold. It raised its sharp claws and grabbed at him. Chuzaoi stayed on the branch. With nowhere to hide, he could only raise his claws and use all his strength to slap it. Impudent little thing. The old baboon's eyes were filled with disdain. This little cub was laughably childish. He actually wanted to rely on his small body to fight him. He was courting death. Bang! The big and small claws collided heavily. The old baboon suddenly swayed and tilted its head, almost falling off the tree trunk. At the same time, he felt a sharp pain and numbness on his palm and arm. The strength of this little cub was actually so terrifying. The old baboon was shocked. Before he could react, Chuzaoi suddenly spat at him and spread his saliva all over his face. Chuzaoi's limbs were also numb, and his small body was almost sent flying. The old baboon was shocked and furious. It immediately wrapped its arms around the tree trunk and used all its strength to shake it. The thin and weak branches on the top of the tree immediately shook violently. My and little curly tail, who were lying at the highest point, were like small boats on a huge wave. They swayed with the branches and were terrified, almost falling from the shaking. Chuzaoi also did not have it easy. He was immediately dizzy from the shaking and swayed left and right, almost losing his balance. The old baboon was overjoyed to see the effect of his move. It continued to hug the tree trunk and shake it vigorously, letting out a pleased and excited roar. Seeing that my and little curly tail were about to lose control, Chuzaoi immediately made up his mind. He roared suddenly and jumped down from the branch, sitting on the old baboon's head. PFFT, at this critical moment, he suddenly let out a super loud fart. Black smoke came out from his butt and instantly wrapped around the old baboon's head. A strong stench instantly filled the entire tree. Ouch! Bug, the old baboon suddenly roared. Just as it was about to use its claws to scratch his butt, its stomach suddenly churned. Its legs went limp and it slid down the tree trunk. Chuzaoi took this opportunity to raise his claws and slap its neck. Bang! 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 3 times in a row. He used all his strength in every move. The sound of bones breaking suddenly came from the old baboon's neck. It could not hold on any longer. Its limbs turned limp and it fell completely from the tree trunk. As for Chuzaoi, he quickly extended his 2 claws while falling and grabbed a nearby branch, hanging there narrowly. Bang! A muffled bang. The old baboon fell to the ground, lowered its head, and twitched a few times before never moving again. He did not know if he was dead or if he fainted from the fall. Chuzaoi did not dare to be careless. He quickly climbed up the tree branch, then climbed down the tree quickly. After landing, he ran to the old baboon's side and bit its neck. 2 rows of small and sharp teeth were tightly stuck in its throat. 10 minutes later, he let go. Seeing that the old baboon was deader than dead, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, he felt his entire body ache and become powerless. His limbs felt like jelly, and he was trembling endlessly with lingering fear. If he was even slightly careless when jumping down just now, he would have lost his life. Fortunately, his actions were agile enough, he was powerful enough and his father was smelly enough. Of course, it was also fortunate that this baboon was old enough and its reactions were a little slow. Its strength had also reached a weak state. God protect me. He was terrified and did not dare to stay on the ground for long. He immediately pulled himself together and climbed back up the tree. On the canopy, my and little curly tail were still obediently lying on the 2 branches and looking at him in a daze, shocked and in disbelief. Of course, he was more grateful and happy after surviving a calamity. When the 2 little cubs saw him climb up the tree, they immediately climbed down from the canopy carefully and climbed to his position. They rubbed and licked him, showing sufficient intimacy and fawning. They seemed to be saying, "Brother is really impressive." Chuzaoi panted as he waved his claws and opened their mouths, looking at the distant grassland. He wondered how the lioness and the cubs were doing. The furious baboon army would not leave the matter rest so easily. He only hoped that his mother was well and that the other lionesses and his siblings were unharmed like them. Bug. My, who was standing behind him, suddenly bond-eyed. The little lioness was rejected by him when she tried to lick his head. Seeing that he was looking into the distance, she prepared to lick his butt secretly to show her affection. In the end, before the stench of farts could dissipate, she vomited from the stench. Little Curly Tail, who was at the side, immediately swung his tail and schadenfreude and retreated far away. Chapter 17. Hunting. The sun was setting in the west. Until evening, the female lions returned. Their fur was messy and their bodies were full of wounds. Their bodies were covered in grass and mud, and they looked haggard. Out of the 5 cubs, only 2 were left. Lars and a small female cub named Gigi were lucky to survive. The other 3 cubs were nowhere to be seen. Clearly, they had been eaten by the baboons. The 2 female lions who had lost their children walked in the grass with sad eyes, smelling the lingering scent of their children. Aisha and Kissia ran under the tree and were frightened by the dead old baboon. They looked up and saw that the 3 young cubs were standing on the tree safe and sound, looking at them. Roar! The 2 female lions called out from under the tree, their eyes filled with love and relief. They called for the 3 of them to come down, as if they wanted to personally check if they were really okay. Chuzhao brought Little Curly Tail and Mai down the tree. Aisha and Kissia immediately came up to them and licked their fur gently, rubbing their heads affectionately. When Chuzhao was rubbing his head affectionately with his mother, Kissia came over and licked his fur to show her affection and gratitude. If he had not insisted on hiding on the tree and did not go down to escape, her daughter would have lost her life like the 3 poor cubs. Chuzhao had saved her and her daughter. She already treated Chuzhao as her child in her heart. Lars lay in the grass with his head hanging, like a child who had done something wrong, dejected and guilty. However, he felt more fear. If not for his mother and the other Leonists protecting him and his father rushing over, he would have already died under the claws of those baboons. Now he understood. It was true that he was a male lion, but he was still very much inferior to his majestic father. He still needed to grow. Only in a few years would he be able to grow into a strong and powerful lion like his father. At that time, he would definitely take revenge for his 3 dead brothers and sisters. Lars looked up at the 3 little fellows who had just been hiding in the tree, his heart full of frustration. As the eldest brother, he was not even as good as his youngest brothers and sisters. The female lions had been chased all the way and had not eaten for the past 2 days, so their stomachs were already rumbling with hunger. Aisha walked in front of the old baboon and smelled the scent on it. She raised her head and looked at Chuzhao strangely. Then, she turned around and called for her other sisters to come and enjoy the food. No Chuzhao's scent lingered on this prey. Although she did not know how her child killed this large baboon, she should handle the spoils of war. The other Leonists surrounded the baboon and started to enjoy the food. Aisha called out to Lars in the grass and made way. Although Lars was ashamed and regretful, he could not resist the hunger in his stomach. He quickly got up and ran over to eat. Among the cubs, he was the oldest and was the one who needed to eat fresh meat the most. Otherwise, it would affect his body's growth. The other cubs could still drink milk to fill their stomachs for the time being. Although this baboon was larger, it was not enough for 5 female lions and a young male cub to enjoy. They would rest for a while, and after breastfeeding, they would go out to hunt again. Although the 2 female lions were sad to have lost their children, they still had to stay strong and be responsible for the pride. The lion had just bitten a mature baboon to death in the battle with the baboon army. After the baboons left, the lion was already eating while the female lions searched for their children. At this moment, the adult baboon that had been bitten to death had probably already entered the lion's stomach completely. Presumably, he would return soon to take care of the cubs. After Chuzhao finished his milk, he returned to the tree, thinking that he had to think of a way to eat more tonight. He had been exercising too much these few days. It was obviously not enough to drink milk alone. However, the tragedy that Lars created today made him hesitate again. However, he would not be stupid enough to provoke those powerful figures. Little things like rabbits, squirrels, and mice were the most suitable prey for cubs. Even if they ate its entire family, it would not dare to resist, right? Chuzhao secretly decided to go and try out his skills tonight. After Little Curly Tail and Mai drank their milk, they climbed up to and lay down beside him, rubbing against his body affectionately. The 2 little fellows now liked to move around and sleep on the tree. After all, they had avoided the last 2 dangers by being on the tree. Their lives were saved by the tree. Lars ate a few bites of meat and went to the lions who had lost her child to drink milk for a while. Then, he lay down beside his mother and slept. What happened today left a deep impression on him. He no longer dared to run out alone. In the future, he had to be obedient and go nowhere. Other than eating, he would just sleep and play. He had to stay obediently by his mother's side and wait to grow up. After he grew up, he would be free and strong. At that time, as long as he bared his fangs, spread his lush mane, and roared a few times, his enemies would definitely be terrified by his name and piss their pants. The sun soon set. The vast grassland turned dark. The strong male lion finished eating and paced back slowly. He did not bring back any flesh for the children. Kissy stayed. The other lioness bid farewell to the children, rubbed their heads against the lions, and set off. A silver moon hung on the branches. From the bushes, the heavy snores of the lion could be heard. Kissy also lay on the grass and closed her eyes. They slept very lightly. On the tree, Chuzhao quietly climbed down after seeing that little curly tail and Mama were asleep. After landing, he stepped on the soft grass and walked towards the bushes at the back. Finally, before he woke Kissy up, he crawled into the dense bushes. He advanced stealthily through the bushes. After walking for a while, he suddenly heard a series of cracking sounds. The sounds were very soft, but in the quiet night, they could be heard clearly. Through the gaps in the vegetation, he saw a grayish-yellow rabbit under a big tree, chewing on nuts with relish. Its 2 ears were standing up vigilantly. Chuzhao was secretly happy. He slowed down and approached it step by step, preparing to sprint. Whoosh! Right at this moment, a figure suddenly jumped out from the grass beside him and bit the wild rabbit's head. Its movements were as fast as lightning, and it pounced so lightly that it seemed like it was flying. Chuzhao looked over and saw that it was a leopard. The leopard bit the rabbit and turned around to leave. It quickly crawled into the lush grass and disappeared. Just as Chuzhao was cursing his bad luck, he suddenly heard a childish roar. Then, the grass swayed. A cat-like young leopard ran out after a limping rabbit. The leopard that had just disappeared reappeared and followed behind the little leopard. Its dark eyes looked around vigilantly. Chuzhao's heart tightened. He lay on the ground and did not dare to move again. He secretly prayed that the limping rabbit would not run towards him. A female leopard that protected its cubs was not to be trifled with. If it misunderstood that he was here to hurt a child, he would be doomed. The leopard's beak was not just for show. It was even more ferocious than a turbine's pressure. Normally, leopards rarely appeared near where lion pride stayed, let alone raised their children here. After all, leopards were extremely afraid of lions. For some reason, this leopard chose this place to take care of its children. Just like humans, they thought that the most dangerous place was the safest place. Or was she using the deterrence of the prey to avoid the threat of hyenas and other carnivores? It seemed that this leopard was not only bold but also smart. However, it was also very dangerous to do so. If the lions discovered them, both mother and daughter would die. As for why he knew that this little leopard was a female, he did not know. Anyway, he knew with just a glance at her. Perhaps this was a natural skill of animals. Roar! Roar! A terrifying scene still happened. The little leopard chased after the limping rabbit and ran towards the bushes he was hiding in. The beautiful but fierce female leopard also followed. Chuzhao's heart immediately rose to his throat and almost jumped out. Chapter 18: The Crisis of the Pride Whoosh. The limping rabbit jumped into the bushes and landed in front of Chuzhao. The little leopard followed closely and chased in. The lion, leopard, and rabbit stayed in place and looked at each other quietly. The air seemed to have frozen. The little leopard looked at him in confusion, as if it did not know what this little thing hiding in the bushes was. The female leopard wagged her tail and walked over. Chuzhao knew that whether he could live or not depended on his luck. In front of the female leopard's absolute strength, no matter how strong and smart he was, it was all in vain. Then, all he could do was pray to the heavens. He suddenly turned around and aimed his butt at the little leopard. He curled his tail and the airflow in his body quickly accumulated in his butt. The little leopard was stunned for a moment. Not knowing what Shu Xiaoyu wanted to do, she took a few steps forward unconsciously and leaned her head close to his butt, wanting to take a closer look. However, right at this moment, there was a loud bang and black smoke suddenly spewed out from behind Shu Xiaoyu's butt. The black smoke curled up the airflow and the little leopard's fur fluttered while its face was distorted. A horrible stench instantly filled the entire bush. The rabbit beside him immediately swayed and fainted. Roar! But the little leopard was scared out of her wits. She suddenly jumped 3 feet high and turned to escape from the bushes with a whoosh. As she ran towards the female leopard, she vomited. The female leopard was shocked and hurriedly ran over to welcome her. She bared her teeth and looked at the bushes. However, she could only see black smoke drifting out from inside. At the same time, she suddenly smelled a terrifying smell. It was the smell of a leon. She jumped in fright and hurriedly tensed up. She protected the little leopard behind her and bared her fangs, letting out a threatening and nervous roar. Ere she stood upright on the spot and did not dare to go forward. The leopard was no match for the leon. Furthermore, her child was still here. She roared and retreated, afraid that a few fierce lions would suddenly rush out from the black smoke. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Shu Xiaoyu had long fled. Of course, he also conveniently took away the rabbit that had fainted from the stench. When the black smoke gradually dispersed, the female leopard's gaze could finally see the situation in the bushes. There were no lions there. The little leopard vomited for a while before charging over angrily. She roared at the bushes and realized that not only was the smelly farthing back thing gone, her little rabbit was gone as well. Roar! Roar! Damn it! Damn it! She cried out angrily as if she was saying this. The female leopard looked around warily, not daring to stay any longer. She quickly called out and left with the little leopard. Shu Xiaoyu carried the rabbit in his mouth and crawled back to the area where the prey was active. Seeing that the female leopard did not chase after him, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. By the time he returned to the pride's camp with the rabbit, Kissier had already woken up and was looking for him anxiously. Seeing that he had actually returned with a wild rabbit in his mouth, the female lion immediately froze in place and looked at him in a daze. Shu Xiaoyu carried the wild rabbit and climbed up the tree. It looked like he could do it easily and was not burdened at all. His strength increased again. Shu Xiaoyu placed the wild rabbit on a branch and started to pluck its fur to eat. Mama woke up and looked at him sleepily for a while. Then, she suddenly realized something and hurriedly got up and came over. The rabbit is so cute, how can you eat it? Shu Xiaoyu thought about what human girls might say when they saw this scene. But Mama was not a young human girl. She was a lion's cub who loved to eat meat. Mama drooled as she leaned against him and rubbed against him gently and fawningly, wanting him to share some food with her. Shu Xiaoyu spat out a mouthful of fur and shifted his body to make way for her. Mama immediately wagged her tail happily like a puppy who was trying to please its owner. She lay beside him and enjoyed the food happily. Under the tree, Kissier raised her head and watched the scene with a gentle gaze. Roar! Shu Xiaoyu called out to little Curly Tail, who was still sleeping soundly. This kid was clearly tired. Could he not smell such delicious food? Little Curly Tail slowly opened his eyes and raised his head slightly. He looked at them in confusion for a while before his nose twitched. Then, he jumped up with a whoosh and almost fell from the tree. Meat. It's actually meat. You guys are actually secretly eating meat. He howled as he ran over anxiously. He opened his mouth and ate while glaring angrily at Mama, who was biting the rabbit's leg. He did not dare to glare at his brother and could only glare at Mama. However, under his brother's dominance, he could only glare a few times and did not dare to extend his claws to slap. There was no need to think. This rabbit meat was definitely caught by his brother. Now, his brother was even more impressive than his father in his heart. If his brother had not taught him how to climb trees and if his brother had not risked his life to protect him, he and Mama would have probably died. His brother was the true lion in his heart. When he grew up, he would definitely accompany his brother and torture all the lions in the nearby territories. He would chase them away and take control of the female lions for himself, making his brother the true king of the grassland. The entire wild rabbit was quickly divided up by the 3 siblings. After eating the fresh meat, Chuzawi felt excited and not sleepy. He climbed up to the canopy and stood at the highest point, bathing in the bright moonlight as he looked at the distant grassland. The 4 diligent female lions had yet to return. It was only until midnight that they returned slowly. Still nothing. The lion looked at them coldly and turned to leave. Kissir went forward and rubbed their heads to comfort them. The 5 female lions lay in the grass in silence, seemingly worried. Lars woke up from his sleep feeling hungry. He stood up and walked to his mother's side, roaring as if he was asking for food. The lions with a broken tail could only lick his fur with a helpless and anxious look. Kissir walked over and lay in front of Lars. She still had excess milk. Mama should not be hungry after eating the rabbit meat. Although Lars no longer wanted to drink milk and only wanted to eat fresh meat, he knew that the female lions had returned empty-handed and did not bring back any prey. He was already famished. He could only lie down beside Kissir and drink milk helplessly. The hoarse growl of the lion came from the grassland in the distance. In the quiet night, it traveled very far. He was warning the wandering lions and enemies nearby that he was still very strong. Whoever dared to invade would not be spared. However, the lack of food not only threatened the lioness and cubs, but also him. If he could not eat his fill, what could he use to resist the enemy? Wait a while more. Or should he make a decision now? Chapter 19, So Despicable. After dawn, the female lions set off to hunt. Kissir stayed behind to take care of the cubs. No one knew where the lion went. After leaving last night, he never returned. When Chuzawi woke up, he woke up Mama and Little Curly Tail. Then, he brought them down the tree to run. After running, he returned to the tree to train his muscles in balance. The female lions only returned at noon. This time, they finally brought back prey. 2 prey actually, 1 big and 1 small gazelle. Lars was extremely happy and ran over with his tail wagging. Gigi followed behind and fell excitedly. Chuzawi brought Little Curly Tail and Mama down the tree. At their age, they should be weaned off milk. The amount of milk a lions could produce had obviously decreased. With fresh meat, who would be willing to drink milk? The female lions and young cubs lay beside their prey and started to tear their fur and flesh to eat. No one knew where the lion went. Until now, he had yet to return. Since he was not around, the female lions would be much more at ease when they ate. They would not have to worry about being attacked and bitten by him. As for the 2 prey, of course, they would not leave him any. It was not that they were selfish and cold, but reality was like this. There was a lack of food and danger everywhere. Every animal here was living arduously and carefully, with the possibility of being eliminated at any time. Furthermore, these 2 gazelles were not enough to fill the stomachs of 5 female lions and 5 young cubs. Hence, they had to be cold. The 2 prey were quickly eaten clean. Chuzawi went to his mother to drink a few mouthfuls of milk before climbing onto the tree and lying on a branch to rest. After Lars had his fill, he was full of energy and wanted to play with Little Curly Tail. While he was not paying attention, Little Curly Tail slapped his head and immediately turned to run. With a whoosh, he climbed up the tree. Lars was furious. He chased to the base of the tree, but could not climb up. He could only roar a few times in a threatening manner before going to hit Mama. Mama ignored him. After nimbly dodging his claws, she quickly climbed up the tree. Lars had no choice but to go and play with Gigi. After fighting him for a while, Gigi was pressed to the ground and cried out in pain. Lars was very pleased. He felt that he was about to grow up. If he could eat such fresh meat every day, he would definitely grow up very quickly. The female lion spread out and lay in the grass around them to rest. Until evening, the lion who went to patrol the borders of the territory returned. He seemed to smell the scent of blood in the air. He looked at the female lions with an icy cold and majestic gaze, then followed the smell of blood to the grass where the female lions and young cubs ate. He let out an angry growl. At this moment, Lars was chasing after Gigi excitedly and happened to pass in front of him. The lion roared angrily, raised its claws, and slapped him on the head. Lars swayed and rolled away, crying out in pain. The lions with a broken tail hurriedly stood up and ran over to protect Lars. However, she did not dare to roar at the leon. Instead, she lowered her head, as if she was begging and apologizing. The lion bared its fangs and growled hoarsely, its gaze filled with ferocity and anger. Lars hurriedly hid behind his mother and shivered. The other lioness lay on the ground, not daring to get up. Fortunately, the lion only growled for a while and did not continue pursuing the matter. He returned to his slope and lay down. Without food, he did not want to waste his energy. He had to preserve his strength at all times to deal with sudden intruders. In the evening, he got up from the slope and chased the female lions out to continue hunting. However, when the sky turned dark, the female lions returned empty-handed. Furthermore, for the next 3 days, the female lions did not catch any more prey. The lion and young cubs were famished. The female lions were also hungry and very tired, but they had to go out to hunt frequently. That night, the lion looked after the cubs, and the 5 female lions all went hunting. After the lion fell asleep, the hungry Chuzhao climbed down the tree and quietly entered the bushes at the back of the tree. He was too hungry. Although he was terrified by the leopard last time, he had no choice but to set off again to get something to eat personally. Even a small mouse could fill his empty stomach. Over the past few days, he felt that his strength had increased a lot again. However, the rate of growth started to slow down. Obviously, it was because of hunger. Tonight, no matter what, he had to get some fresh meat to replenish his energy. He encountered the terrifying female leopard in the stupid cut the last time in the forest on the right. This time, he decided to move towards the left. In the quiet forest, the sounds of insects could be heard clearly. He walked for more than 10 minutes, but he did not see a single prey. This place was about a mile away from the lion camp. He could not go further. Otherwise, if he encountered danger, he would be unable to escape unscathed. He took a few more steps forward and looked through the dense bushes into the forest. It was empty. He was disappointed and dejected. Just as he was about to turn around and return, there was a sudden movement in the grass in front of him. Then, a small deer jumped out with a limp. Chuzhao was overjoyed. Just as he was about to rush up while drooling, a figure suddenly jumped out of the grass and lay on the deer's back. When he looked, it was actually that little leopard again. Chuzhao was shocked, angry, anxious, and afraid. He looked carefully at the grass and indeed, he saw the terrifying female leopard again. He cursed his bad luck and hurriedly lay on the ground, trembling and not daring to move. However, a scene that he did not expect happened again. The limping deer struggled to break free of the little leopard's body and limped towards him. As for the little leopard, it chased up excitedly. The deer crawled into the bushes and stopped in front of him. The little leopard also crawled in and stared at him with its amber eyes. She was most afraid of sudden silence. PFFT, just like that night, there was a sudden explosion. Then, black smoke spewed out. The little leopard fled. Roar. But Chuzhao picked up the deer and ran away. Hunger made him brave. Hunger made him fast. Hunger made him shameless. Just like that night, the female leopard was frightened and hurriedly protected the little leopard as they retreated. She looked at the bushes that were emitting black smoke with a panicked and nervous gaze. After the black smoke cleared, before she could see if any lions were hiding inside, the little leopard ran over angrily. Its fur stood on end as it roared towards the bush. This time, she did not seem to be saying "damn it. Damn it." Instead, she was saying, "So despicable. So despicable." Chapter 20. Father and Son. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse. He returned with plenty of prey. Chuzhao never would have thought that he would encounter the mother and daughter pair of leopards twice when he went out. Furthermore, he had snatched their prey twice. No. How could this be called snatching? This was clearly because the little leopard was too stupid to catch it, and he had relied on his agile skills and graceful positioning to catch it. This was the symbol of strength. The night was very quiet. Chuzhao carried the deer and quietly returned to the camp of the lions. The lion was still sleeping in the grass not far away. He carefully picked up the prey and climbed up the tree, not daring to make too much noise. If the lion found out, the prey would definitely be snatched away. The big one snatches from the small one. This was true snatching. He could not resist at all. Although the deer was small, it was quite heavy. However, he had become much stronger now. Holding the deer in his mouth, he climbed up the tree. His legs did not feel like jelly, and he was not panting. He could still go up to the 5th floor in one breath. He placed the deer on a wide and strong branch and started to pluck its fur to eat. He was so hungry. The sleeping Mai moved her nose and opened her eyes. Then, she jumped up and quickly came over while shaking our boat, rubbing against his body affectionately with a fawning expression. "Go ahead and eat." Chu Xiao made way. He could not finish a whole deer anyway, and it was enough for the 3 of them. As for little Curly Tail, he would eat when he woke up. So I did not call him. He did not want to make a noise and wake the lion up. However, Mama eagerly ran to little Curly Tail's side and reached out with her claws to pat his head. It seemed like the little lioness did not mind that little Curly Tail always bullied her in the past. Or perhaps, she knew that in Chu Xiao's heart, she could not compare to him, his younger brother. This was also very obvious fawning. Little Curly Tail was woken up by her slap. Just as he was about to flare up, he suddenly smelled the sweet scent of blood. His sleepiness immediately vanished. He hurriedly got up, rushed to the prey, and started wolfing it down. His mother's milk had become very little. Over the past few days, the female lions did not catch any prey. He was hungry. Mama came over and lay beside Chu Xiao, eating elegantly. "Brother is impressive." Little Curly Tail and Mama looked up at Chu Xiao as they ate, their eyes filled with happiness and admiration. Soon, only the deer's neck, head, and half of its thigh were left. The most delicious parts of prey were naturally their internal organs. However, Chu Xiao did not eat any internal organs and only ate 2 legs and half of its ribs. Little Curly Tail wolfed down all the internal organs. Just as this kid was about to eat the remaining half of the thigh, Chu Xiao slapped him away. When Mama was about to bite the deer's neck, he slapped her away as well. The 2 little fellows looked at him aggrievedly. They were not full yet. Chu Xiao looked at their round stomachs and ignored them. He bit the remaining neck and head and climbed down the tree. He looked wearily at the lion not far away and quietly walked to Lars and Gigi's side, placing the food in front of them. As at this moment, there was a sudden noise behind him. He jumped in fright, thinking that the lion had woken up and was coming over while concealing himself. He turned around and saw that it was Mai. The little lioness bit the remaining half of her thigh and followed behind him. She came to Lars and Gigi's side and placed the food in front of them. She rubbed against Chu Xiao's body in a fawning manner, narrowed her angry eyes, and seemed to be saying, "Brother, is Mama smart? I knew that you were going to give the remaining food to brother and sister Gigi." Chu Xiao was instantly speechless. He planned to hang at half of the thigh on the canopy to dry. He would eat it the next time he was hungry. Forget it. Since she had taken it down, he would need them eat it. Lars was already more than a year old. This little flesh was not enough for him to eat. Chu Xiao sighed and reached out with his claws to slap Lars and Gigi awake. He pointed at the food in front of them and then at the lion not far away, hoping that they would make less noise and not wake up their greedy and cold father. While Lars and Gigi were in the daze, Chu Xiao had already left with Mama and climbed up the tree. They must have thought that they were dreaming. Soon, Lars and Gigi wolfed down the food and even started biting and snatching it. After all, there was very little food and it was only enough for one of them. Lars was more than a year old and was the oldest among the cubs. He was also a lion, so he was naturally much stronger than Gigi. With a few slashes, Gigi crawled on the ground and cried out in grievance and anger. The lion was woken up. Just as Lars was proudly chewing on the half of the deer's thigh, a strong and huge claw suddenly slapped him and he fell to the ground with a bang. He was dizzy and could not get up for a long time. The lion roared angrily and snatched the remaining half of the deer thigh and the remaining portion of deer head away with one bite and left to enjoy it alone. Gigi shivered in fear and did not dare to say another word. Lars lay on the ground, panting. His gaze as he looked at the lion was filled with hatred and anger. Perhaps the seed of hatred was buried at this moment. When he grew up, it would take root and germinate. When he became stronger, his father would grow older and weaker. At that time, the new king would replace the old king. Chu stood on the tree and watched as the father and son fought for food. He also thought of what Lars was thinking. However, he also thought of something Lars did not expect. When the young male lions of the pride grow up, they might be chased away by the Lion King at the age of 2 or 3. At that time, the young lion would become a wandering lion, homeless and lonely. He would have no home, no food, no territory, and would be bullied by all sorts of social animals and other lions. He could lose his life at any moment. A lion that lived upright would have a very low survival rate. Chu thought of the future of Lars and himself and little Curly Tail. Hence, he had to become stronger while he still had the time to. Even if he was chased out of the pride and wandered around, he could hunt, fight, and live on his own. Lars thought too simply. No lion would foolishly wait for their cubs to grow up under the protection of a pride and then snatch their throne. Their father especially would never do so. On the distant horizon, the 5 female lions returned exhausted, bathing in the bright moonlight. Their mouths were empty, and they returned empty-handed again. The lion finished eating the deer's remaining flesh and stood up, looking at the distant grassland with a cold and deep gaze. The night wind blew. The heat in the air grew stronger. It seemed like it was time to make a decision. End of Part 1. Novels Hall Dynasty.